Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the House Appropriations Committee Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. Today we have 5 agencies, and here is the order in which the agencies will appear. First, the Maryland Energy Administration, then the Maryland Environmental Service, then the Department of Environment, then MDOT, the Secretary's Office, and MDOT State Highway Administration. We will have our budget analyst, Ms. Bujal, begin, and the director of MEA and your staff, you may come forward too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Suveksha Bujal, and I will be discussing the Maryland Energy Administration. The fiscal 26 budget decreases by $26.8 million, or 10.1%, to a total of $237.6 million. Moving on to page 4, the performance analysis. Exhibit 1 on page 5 shows the in-state renewable energy generation. In calendar 2023, in-state renewable energy generation totaled 4,761 megawatt hours, an increase of approximately 7.5% from previous year. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the awards issued to promote in-state renewable energy generation. In fiscal 2024, MEA awarded a total of 4,579 grants to individuals, businesses, local governments, and other entities to incentivize in-state renewable energy generation for a variety of sources, a decrease of 894 grants, or 16.3% from the total number of grants awarded in fiscal 2023. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the energy savings from energy efficiency programs. MEA anticipates a slight increase in overall energy savings in fiscal 2024. Exhibit 4 on page 9 presents data on annual energy savings and spending for T&E Lawton Conservation Loan Program. On page 9, there is a discussion on the fiscal 24 closeout. At fiscal 24 closeout, MEA canceled a total of $26.6 million. $25 million were in special funds, $1.6 million were in federal funds, and about $18,400 were in reimbursable funds. MEA reports these cancellations were associated with appropriations carried forward from fiscal 2018 through 2023. That were not expended or encumbered. MEA should discuss why these funds were not expended or encumbered. On page 10, there is a discussion on the use of $90 million that was transferred from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund to the Dedicated Purpose Account. The fiscal 25 budget transferred $90 million of CEF fund balance to the DPA to be used for implementations of provisions of Chapter 38 of 2022 and Maryland's Energy Pollution Reduction Plan. Of the $90 million, a budget amendment transferred $53.7 million to MEA, which will be used to provide grants for a community electric vehicle supply and equipment program, electric school buses, and building electrification. MEA should discuss how much of the $53.7 million transferred from the DPA has been awarded and when it plans to complete the award process. MEA should also discuss when it expects to request the remaining $36.3 million in the DPA. Exhibit 5 on page 12 shows the overview of agency spending. The largest share of fiscal 26 allowance consists of renewable and clean energy programs and initiatives at $159.9 million, or 68% of the total budget. Within this program, the largest area of spending is for solar energy-related programs, which totals $93.8 million. Outside of renewable and clean energy programs and initiatives, energy efficiency program totals $60.1 million, or 25% of the fiscal 26 allowance. Exhibit 6 on page 13 shows the spending by source. CEF sourced from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative Program revenues is the largest source of funding in fiscal 26 allowance, totaling $114.1 million, or 48%. CEF sourced from the alternative compliance payments totals $101.8 million, or 43% of the fiscal 26 allowance. Exhibit 7 on page 15, we have the proposed budget change chart. The fiscal 26 allowance for MEA decreases by 26.8 million or 10.1% compared to fiscal 25 working appropriation. There is a 73.4 million increase for partnership programs with local government, including funding for clean energy initiatives and Maryland Smart Energy Communities Program, and an increase of 20 million for partnerships with state agencies to install clean energy on government buildings. On page 16, there is a reduction of 138 million, which is for unspecified reduction related to ACP funding. MEA did not provide complete additional data, budget data in time to be included in this writing. Detail provided by MEA did not reconcile for all years and therefore could not be used. The sources of funds used to support the appropriations were not always consistent across data reported in governor's budget books. Detail on contract and grant spending provided as part of the budget as provided by MEA. MEA should comment on the cause of this difference and efforts that it will intake to ensure consistent reporting of its budget data. MEA should also comment on the programs that will be impacted by the unspecified reduction of 138 million related to ACP spending. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that MEA provide annual data on MEA's funding by programmatic activity and sources. On page 17, there is also a discussion on the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act. The fiscal 26 BRFA as introduced includes 3 provisions impacting the SEIF, though none of them directly impact MEA in fiscal 26. The first provision authorizes the governor to transfer up to 150 million from the ACP account of SEIF to general fund. The second set of provision removes the SEIF from the list of special funds exempted from having interest directed to general fund. The third provision includes 6.1 million in special fund appropriation for the Maryland Department of Environment. Exhibit 8 on page 19 shows the renewable portfolio standard solar carve-out. The annual percentage of solar energy as a percentage of total electricity sold has remained below the RPS percentage requirement each year since 2019. According to annual PSC reporting on the RPS program, total ACP of 320.4 million in calendar 23 was required to meet program compliance. In comparison, the annual required ACP requirements in fiscal 2022 was 86.6 million. It is anticipated that ACP revenue will continue to remain elevated in near terms unless the amount of in-state solar capacity increases to meet the RPS solar carve-out percentage requirements. On page 20, there's a discussion on the funds from ACP revenue supporting the DPA appropriation. Fiscal 26 allowance of the DPA includes 180 million in special funds from the SEIF from ACP revenue to support implementation of the state's climate pollution reduction plan, of which 80 million is to support the solar and geothermal development and on public facilities and municipal landfills. 50 million is for solar development on state properties, and 50 million is to support block grants to school districts. Although DBM advises that it is its intent that this project be located within eligible communities, DLS is concerned that these projects would not be considered as directly benefiting the communities as required in the statute. In the analysis for State Reserve Fund, DLS recommended adding budget bill language, making the appropriation of 180 million contingent on legislation authorizing the use of SEIF funds for the disclosed purposes. Exhibit 9 on page 22 shows the SEIF balance for non-regi source sub-accounts. At the close of fiscal 24, the balance on non-regi source SEIF sub-accounts totaled 433.1 million. Accounting for proposed transfer to the general fund. The fiscal 25 ending balance for non-regi source sub-accounts is estimated to be 412.6 million. The fiscal 26 ending balance is estimated to be 144.3 million. Given the significant fund balance estimated at the close of fiscal 25 and 26, DLS recommends amending the provision of the BRFA as introduced to increase the transfer of this balance to general fund by 30 million. On page 23, there's discussion on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding. The fiscal 26 allowance for MEA includes federal funding available to the state through the IIJA from 3 programs, which are preventing outages and enhancing resilience of the electric grid, State Energy Program, and Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. On page 25, we have the personal data. Fiscal 26 allowance includes funding for an additional 6 regular positions and a net reduction of 12 contractual positions. Moving on to the first issues. Exhibit 10 on page 27 presents Regi auction clearing prices and the total auction revenues received by Maryland. Auction 65 resulted in the highest auction clearing price in the history of Regi program, which was $25.75 per allowance. Exhibit 11 on page 28 shows the Regi program revenues received by Maryland from all auctions held during fiscal 24. It totaled $214.2 million, which is the highest yearly revenue in program history. Through the first 2 quarterly auctions held in fiscal 25, Maryland Regi program revenue have totaled $127.4 million. Exhibit 12 on page 30 provides the current statutory allocation of Regi auction revenues as required by the state government article. The allocation of Regi auction revenues to the various CIF sub-accounts as required by statute occurs following the distribution of certain transfers. In fiscal 26, these transfers include $2.1 million to the Maryland Energy Innovation Fund and $8.25 million to the Transportation Trust Fund. Exhibit 13 on page 31 shows the transfer of CIF funds to other state agencies. The fiscal 26 allowance includes a total of $291.8 million in Regi source CIF spending. Regi source CIF spending by state agencies increases by $50.2 million in fiscal 26, primarily due to increase in the Department of Human Services for energy assistance of $56 million and increase of $25.5 million in energy efficiency and conservation programs. Exhibit 14 on page 33 shows the estimated Regi source CIF fund balance. At the close of fiscal 24, the balance of the Regi source CIF totaled $532.2 million. MEA should provide information on the fiscal 24 balance after taking into account encumbrances to reflect only the available balance. The fiscal 25 ending balance of Regi-sourced sub-accounts after accounting for the interest and investment earnings to the general fund is estimated to be $220.8 million, and in fiscal 26 is estimated to be $194.9 million. MEA should comment on the reasons for the accrual of a large balance in the administration sub-account. DLS recommends adding a provision to the BRFA to transfer $30 million of this balance to the general fund. There are a number of activities and projects funded in the Maryland Consolidated Capital Bond Loan of 2025. DLS will make recommendations related to the use of CIF balance for certain projects and programs containing climate solutions now implementation elements instead of general obligation bond in forthcoming capital analysis. Issues 2, starting on page 34, discusses the Federal Inflation Reduction Act home energy rebate programs. MEA has submitted application for the home energy performance-based whole house rebate program and the high efficiency electric home rebate program. Both the applications have been conditionally approved by the U.S. Department of Energy. MEA should comment on the status of these applications. Moving on to Exhibit 16 on page 39. The exhibit presents the data on total annual registration of zero-emission vehicles in Maryland and the total number of publicly accessible charging stations statewide. As of fiscal 24, there were a total of 103,400 zero-emission vehicles registered in Maryland. Moving on to page 40, we have the operating budget recommended actions. DLS recommends reducing funds allocated for reclassifications, which were double budgeted. DLS also recommends adopting committee narrative, requesting report on revenue assumptions, fund balance, and uses of CEF revenue sourced from REGI program auctions, report on federal IIJA and IRA funding and implementation of Home Energy Rebate Program, report on MEA funding, and report on the uses of CEF revenues transferred to the DPA. On page 43, we have the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act recommended action. The first action recommends amending provision authorizing a transfer of $150 million from the Renewable Portfolio Standard Alternative Compliance Payment account of the CEF to transfer $180 million. The second action, recommended action, authorizes a transfer of $30 million from the administrative account of CEF to the general funds. That concludes my presentation, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. We appreciate your time on that, and we will go directly to Director Pinsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's good to see you again. I know the economic conditions are different than they were last year, and hopefully that'll be reflected in some of my comments. On behalf of the Maryland Energy Administration, let me start by thanking our new DLS analyst, Ms. Bougel, for the comprehensive review of the agency budget. Before getting to the specifics and the questions raised in the review, let me give a little context to what we're doing, where we are at the agency itself. Our mission is to promote clean, reliable, affordable energy, and at the same time reduce greenhouse gases. So that is our mission. And we have two other guideposts. The Law of Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act, which calls for a 60% reduction by 2031 and be carbon net neutral in 2045, and the governor's call for 100% clean energy. So there are two other things that are helping direct the work that we pursue. In 24, we provided over 7,000 rebates to Marylanders and over 200 grants to support projects that reduce energy consumption and improve affordability and expand clean energy. We believe that energy efficiency shouldn't be the last option, it should be the first option. Let me just mention 3 or 4 initiatives that we're involved in. The Solar Energy Equity Program is focused on low-income Marylanders who may be cash poor but own their own house. And the idea is that we will pay for rooftop solar as long as their roof can handle it, and it's not going to be a collapse. So we do a review of that. We've also provided in some jurisdictions, Frederick County, $1.25 million grant for its Power Savers retrofit program as well. We also have the Energy Efficiency Equity Program, again, towards low and moderate income by funding energy efficiency. As I said, we want to do that first, whether it's windows, insulation, whatever, and use less fuel. That's, we think, where we need to start. Let me pick a county, Howard County. We have a public facility solar and solar canopy grant. In Howard County, we support solar on the East Columbia Library, the Skaggsville Public Safety Complex, and the East Columbia Library, a canopy there. We have a medium and heavy duty zero emissions vehicle program. And, you know, one thing that was very surprising to me is we help fund an electric fire truck in Frederick County, an electric fire truck. I mean, who would have thought? You know, we also do replace diesel school buses with electric school buses. There are a number in Anne Arundel County and some other counties across the state. We have a decarbonizing public schools program where we'd like the schools to be carbon net neutral. Three were built about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 now, where we paid the marginal difference before they were constructed, where the architect put geothermal, that's the pipes underground where water stays at 55 degrees. So they did geothermal under their baseball field. They used heat pumps, and they used solar on the roof. And they actually create more clean energy than the school uses. And they also integrated into the school program, the science program. And we have a program starting in Wacomico County in Fruitland Elementary School for a $2 million solar array that will enable that school, even though it's already built, to be a net zero energy. There are a number of others that we do. We have an Evergreen Heritage Center Foundation in Allegheny County. They got $100,000 to install a solar PV system to educate students in the public about the use of alternative energy. So, look, our budget is basically a maintenance budget. It's actually a little lower than it was last year. And we understand the economic condition, and MEA wants to be a team player and help out in that situation, even though we are not, our funds do not come from the general fund. But we understand the complexity of creating a budget and fairness, so we want to be part of that. Let me get to the questions raised by the DLS analyst. First of all, in terms of the reports that are requested, we agree and will support providing those reports that were suggested or requested in the review. First question was about the 26.6 million grants that were canceled in 2024. A lot of groups, institutions that apply for grants stack their grants. We're not the only grant they're requesting. And some of the other grants don't come through, or as in any business, some people look at it and then walk away. So there were a number of outstanding grants over the years. So in 2024, we step back and say, these are not going to happen, so that's why they were canceled. We just wanted to get them off the books and actually reuse that money. We don't want them to be sitting encumbered when the either the private sector or NGO was proposing a project that's not going to get off the ground. So that's why that happened. Second question was, how much of the 53.7 million transferred from the dedicated purpose account in 25 for grants has been awarded, and when it plans to complete the process? First of all, we have a number of grants that are alive right now and about to close. The school bus grant, community EV program, which is the infrastructure, electrifying community buildings. They will be awarded by the end of May in 2020 of this calendar year. We're also working with DHCD to identify residential properties to deploy a portion of the funds for electrifying low-income family, multifamily buildings. The balance, the other 36.3 million remaining in the account, will be advertised at the very beginning of the 26th fiscal year, and we are extremely confident they will be more requests than we have money available, and they will be granted sometime in the next year. But the 60% of it or 70% will be completed during this budget year. Then the question becomes, there are some discrepancies a couple of years ago impacting $138 million related to ACP, alternative compliance payment spending. They recommend adopting committee narrative requesting information on that. Due to an internal deadline for agencies to finalize their budget request, and that we were undergoing changes in the leadership of our finance department, there was an error. I'll be frank about it, and we'll own it. The budget, the 26 budget allowance changes that to $98 million after review, and not the $138 million that was initially thought. And if there are questions about that, I have my finance director, James Jimmy Cobb, next to me. Then there's a question about some offshore development fund money. There's a $0.8 million appropriated and $2 million in the CEF for that allowance. I mean, as many of you know, the offshore wind initiative is somewhat put on hold. Maryland has 3 leases in the ocean. One is U.S. Wind, which is pretty far along, and we're cautiously optimistic that will be completed and concluded and not suffer a clawback from the federal government, and they're supposed to be operational late 27, early 28. The other 2 that are Ørsted and Equinor, they have the lease areas. They have not gone through the federal process, so we're not real optimistic that we're going to see a lot of action over the next 4 years. So if that fund's not used, we will make assessment to that. But we understand some of that's in question. Okay, MEA should provide information on fiscal balances after taking into account encumbrances. Here are the balances. Energy assistance, we have 115 million, 0.5. LMI energy efficiency, we have 29 million. Energy efficiency and conservation programs, 51.5 million. Renewable and clean energy programs, we count 39.9 million. Administration, 82+ million. And our subtotal for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative sub-accounts, less encumbrances is 318 million, plus another third of a million. Almost done. MEA should comment on the reasons for the accrual of such a large balance in the administration sub-account. DLS recommends taking another $30 million from the balance of the general fund. Well, in the budget, $150 million was shifted by the governor from that fund. So that's one amount of money we're losing. The other recommendation was to shift interest from both 25 and 26 going forward. So whereas in the past we would accrue the interest and use it for grants, that now by statute or recommendation for statute, that will go to the general fund. So we're giving up the $150 million. We are shifting all of the interest that we normally would accrue. And now the recommendation is for an additional $30 million to be shifted. So again, we want to be team players here, but we would respectfully, very respectfully disagree on the transfer of additional funds to the general fund. We're to comment on the 2 federal programs, the IRA programs, what are called the Home and HERA Awards. Maryland and the MA was projected to receive $135 million over 4 or 5 years. We applied. We were conditionally approved. We're in the category with about 30 other states that were conditionally approved, and there's still some more questions from the previous administration. We were given the go-ahead to hire staff to administer the grants, and late last week, while we hired the 2 and we committed to funding them, late last week we were told we could draw down from the federal fund to pay for those 2 administrative staff. In terms of $135 million, I have to say, we don't know. You know, it's a crapshoot to see what's going to happen with the federal government and the IRA. Can it be reversed? There are a lot of legal questions that go over our heads, and other people will decide. So that's yet to be determined. And again, that was over 4 or 5 years. We have developed programs, particularly in low and moderate incomes, as well. So that's to be discussed going forward. So with that, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Pinsky, for going through all of the questions that were asked of you and giving us additional information about the programs, the very valuable programs that you administer. And I have first up, Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, for all the good work you all do. I want to follow up on this back and forth discussion about some of these significant fund balances. Obviously, you guys are doing a lot of good things. You're funding a lot of good programs and grants. Some accrual of fund balances makes sense, obviously, for long-term and multi-year efforts. But we're still left with some pretty significant balances that seem to not be getting spent down, or at least not spent down maybe quickly enough in ways that will contribute to our climate and energy goals as intended. You already talked about the $26 million in grants that were canceled in FY24, the offshore wind fund. We're also seeing the record-breaking RGGI auction sales, ACP revenues growing dramatically, and so on. And so my question is, how do we sort of think strategically to make sure that the money is getting where it needs to go more efficiently and quickly to support these really important climate and energy goals, or otherwise better align and leverage the revenues that are in these balances so they're not just sitting there over long periods of time?
No,
Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a great question. Look, we want to get as much of this money on the street and into projects as quickly as we can. We don't want to hoard it. It doesn't benefit us. In fact, it looks bad for us. Look, we are maybe the smallest agency. We have 70 people between PINs and contractual workers. 2/3 of the organization works on programs. We have 20+ programs. Some of them are oversubscribed or applied for. There are a few that are under, and we're trying to work on that. Sometimes it takes a while for them to get moving, in terms of programs. Again, whether it's community solar, where if you rent your property but want to take advantage of clean energy and also lower your bill, that's one area. The large scale utility scale, we give no money to, but we encourage it because it's the best bang for the buck. And then you've got residential, people who can put it on their home. So we're trying to do that. We're trying to expand geothermal and heat pumps. And we think electrification and heat pumps instead of HVAC, it's really a potential growth area. So I'm not here to ask for more PINs to get more, because we don't want to fund a project that's going to go nowhere or it's going to be embarrassment. So we have to have 3 people, particularly if they're competitive projects, go through all of them and to sign off on it. So it's somewhat labor intensive. I mean, we have 2/3 of our organization doing that. So we would like to move faster, more broadly. We would like to have larger increments of our awards, which would take fewer people and less time to do. So we are working in a number of areas. And you mentioned, and the other thing, you mentioned ACP. Last year, the ACP had a dramatic jump. We don't know if it's a 1 year and then it's going to go back down to where it was in 23, or if it's going to be here for 2 or 3 years. It's hard to tell. We just don't know. Alternative compliance payments are purchased by utilities rather than by renewable energy credits. When renewable energy credits are done, it's usually for a project of big scale. And that might not be in Maryland, but it might be a wind turbine farm in the Midwest, or it might be a solar farm in Texas, but it's clean energy. But sometimes the REC prices are up here and the ACP prices are here, and they're not required to buy the RECs. And some of these companies will go for the cheapest alternative. So they go to ACP. And again, we take that money and invest it on smaller scale things. We'd rather than be on large projects, which would get more return on investment. But we just don't know how that's going to play out. I know DLS said they think at least for 1 more year it'll be significant. We worked our calculations on the last 3 ACP and averaged them out to try to figure out what's real. The RGGI, we used the last 8 quarters. They have an auction every quarter. It's going up a couple million, but it's not humongous. And finally, we're trying to align our efforts on energy with the climate solution plan from MDE, who you're going to hear about later, which came from the Climate Solutions Now Act that I played a role in. So we want to get the money as quickly as we can. We don't want money to sit in a fund. We understand the governor suggesting taking $150 million out. We understand another $30 million out. We want to get as many projects to move towards our goals as we can.
Delegate Spiegel, go, if you have another question.
Yes,
You may
I
go
do.
ahead, but I would just ask the delegates and the directors to keep your answers as brief as possible. We have 5 agencies to get through today.
I apologize.
And we're already 45 minutes into this hearing, so let's be concise, disciplined, and brief. Delegate Spiegel.
Yes, Madam Chair. I want to ask you about school bus electric vehicle contracts and grants. I'm not sure if MEA had a role in funding the contract in Montgomery County, but I represent Montgomery County, and as you know, I'm sure there have been some pretty high-profile news coverage of major challenges with that contract, $160 million contract for Montgomery County school buses that ended up having to be partially terminated, under-delivered, underperforming, all kinds of challenges and issues with that. I'm a big fan conceptually of the idea, but I want to make sure that we're doing what we can to support workable contracts and grants for electric school buses.
Great. Let me bring up my Director of Program, Eric Kaufman, also who lives in Montgomery County.
Eric Kaufman, Division Director, Energy Programs, for the record. One of the things we have provide grants to many school districts across the state. One of the areas where we are also providing additional resources is to help them with planning so that they can help identify the challenges early and then resolve them with better implementation. Each jurisdiction makes their purchasing decisions by their own procedures and policies. In terms of Montgomery County, we have provided them a grant in the past for a portion of their project. So often when we're looking at programs, we're looking at the incremental cost as how do we defray the incremental cost of the vehicle.
And we have, I think, 6 electric buses in Anne Arundel County. They have moved with less problems. So I think it gets to the point that each county addresses it differently. We can talk offline, and Eric would be happy to get into more detail with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do you have anything else? You sure you're good? Delegate Yielson?
Just one question. You had a guest commentary published this morning in the Baltimore Sun on issues related to costs for energy for ratepayers. They say government doesn't move that quickly, but I already read it. Wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of amplify what you said there, because I think it's so important, number one. And number two, one of the things you didn't discuss in it is energy generation. And I'm curious if you can tell us from your perspective whether the amount of energy that we generate in the state of Maryland versus the amount that we import is a particularly, impactful factor in rising costs right now for energy prices.
The chair said to keep it brief. That's a big.
You can do it.
I will try. The article today in the Baltimore Sun and op-ed basically said there are many causes, but one we're pretty clear on is the distribution. The utilities, through the existing law, can get money up front. They can replace a pipe or line, and we think that it's been abused, to be honest with you. That they're replacing non-leaking pipe. Some is actually non-priority pipe, and I think it's outrageous. And the ratepayers, your constituents, end up paying for the new pipe and the building 8 to 9% return on investment, the profit. And that's what the article speaks to. And I think
just to be clear on that one point, sorry to interrupt you, but in order for them to do that, they have to receive approval from the Public Service Commission to do so, correct?
That's true. That's true. Okay. And, does past practice shape what the PSC does? It might. And if there were messages from the legislature to be tougher, that maybe 8 to 9% is not the right return on investment, I think they would listen.
Got it.
So, so that was part one, and it's in the Baltimore Sun today if you want to read it. In terms of the second part of the question, what about generation? First, does that add to the cost too? And I'd say probably. Now, when you build new generation, whether it be gas, whether it be nuclear, there's a cost to it, and it gets passed on to the ratepayers. Now, there's been a big debate about resource adequacy. Is there enough energy to keep up with demand? There are more people. There's obviously the data center question. There's electrification, which we support electrification, getting away from fossil fuels. You know, I have to tell you, I have quite concerns about PJM. That PJM is the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland consortium, that 13 states plus DC, that they buy the energy and ship it off. They have their own queue and block some, and they want new energy, and I don't think they care what type of energy. I think they've been encouraging fossil fuels, which is not what MEA thinks is the right direction to go in 2025. There's a cost there. And, you know, there are lots of options. You know, nuclear has been talked about more and more. You know, when I speak around the state and I say, how many people understand that the lights wouldn't go on without nuclear energy, I get about 2% of the crowd raising their hand. Well, 40% of our in-state energy comes from nuclear. So I'll stop there because you have more here. I'd be happy to speak with you offline.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's all I had.
Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, it's good to see you again.
You too.
Nice to have you here. Just quickly, and maybe this is actually a better question for MDOT, but I know you all work on this collaboratively and really closely. On the vehicle charging infrastructure program, I know you all are working on about a $12 million program for multifamily units and community centers. And then obviously, you know, we've got the NEVI program. So I don't know if, I mean, maybe this is an offline question that we can have more of a robust conversation about, but I guess the one question that I have is on the actual maintenance of the charging stations. Once grants have been given and once the charging stations have gone in, who is then responsible for maintaining them and making sure they're actually working?
Okay, to your first question, as you'll hear from Mr. Wiedefeld, they deal with NEVI. They deal with the national type things on the interstates, Route 50, et cetera. Local charging infrastructure near multifamily homes, near offices, that generally falls on us. Okay, and Eric, Mr. Kaufman is the one who handles that. My understanding is the company that gets a contract has to keep them working. And as I have an electric car, and some of you may, some companies keep them working pretty well, and some are doing a pretty horrible job. Eric, you want to just very briefly expand on that, or expand on that briefly?
Yeah, it's definitely an area where we're working with the EV and infrastructure companies, communities, and how to not only make sure that these charging stations are available, but also how they can prevent outages. A lot of the hand-holding and technical assistance we provide also helps with that in helping educate on efforts that can be built into how they procure the charge as well as how they build the infrastructure out in their buildings to be able to ensure better reliability.
And I would, Ian just told me, there's a bill on this very topic in another committee, so I think that may come before you as well.
Okay, great. Well, maybe we can follow up offline, because I guess, so MDOT will take the first 2 rounds of the NEVI grants for the alternative fuel corridors, and then based on your comment, it sounds like when we get into more of the community infrastructure, that'll be more MEA's bailiwick?
But by and large, I mean, there's a little bleed to, I think, MDE and even to MDOT, but by and large, most of the infrastructure and the grants and funding comes through us.
Okay, great. And I'd love to follow up on the DHCD partnership as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Director, we do have more questions. We just don't have more time. So what we're going to do is going to put them in writing and send them to you through our legislative analyst, Ken Weaver. And you should probably expect those in the next day or two. And if you could turn them around as quickly as possible, that would be great.
We'd be happy to.
And we appreciate your time today. Thank you to you and your staff.
No, thank you for your patience. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have the Maryland Environmental Services, and we have Mr. Quist with us today. And we have Director Glass here, I believe, and perhaps other staff members may come forward. And you may begin, Mr.
Thank you. The Maryland Environmental Service, as a reminder, is a non-budgeted independent state agency.
Let me just interrupt you 1 second, if you don't mind. Sure. Yep. We did forget about 2 people who were here to testify for the MEA budget. And if they are here, I'm just going to delay you for 1 minute. We have Eric Galley and Kim Coble from the League of Conservation Voters. I'm sorry to overlook you, but you'll have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Right, and it'll just be me, Eric.
Great, thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it's great to be here. I'm Kim Coble, Executive Director for the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. I'm here in support of the governor's proposed budget as with regards to MEA. I want to acknowledge the fiscal challenge that you have in front of you. It's daunting, and I appreciate the respect the work that you have to do to get through it. But I also want to point out that MEA's role is critical and unique when it comes to meeting our climate goals. In particular, the CEF dollars that are coming in, they're very important funding for individual and community-based programs. It's one of the unique features of that funding source. And the other thing is that when you combine the environmental agencies in Maryland, MEA, MDE, DNR, and agriculture, it's about 1% of the state budget, and yet those agencies combined are being asked to absorb about $300 million in cuts. And again, with all due respect to the work that you have in front of you, we do believe that the governor's budget should be retained, and we urge that support.
We appreciate you being here today for that. Thank you. And that is all for the testimony. So we'll close Maryland Energy Administration and we'll restart Maryland Environmental Services. Mr. Quist, thank you.
Thank you. The Maryland Environmental Service, as a reminder, is an independent, non-budgeted state agency responsible for providing a variety of environmental services to the public and private sectors for a fee-for-service basis. The page 1 of the analysis is showing data from their annual audited financial statements. MES had a total net assets in fiscal 24 of about $30.7 million, which was an increase in total net position of $674,000 from the prior year. Their operating income in fiscal 24 was a negative $833,000. Although revenues grew by $19.3 million, total operating expenditures grew by $20.3 million. On page 2 of the analysis, Exhibit 1 is showing a summary of where the MES revenues come from in fiscal 24. You can see about 95% of revenues come from projects completed for state and local governments. Similarly, on page 3, Exhibit 2 is showing a breakdown of revenues by project category. The largest categories of projects were environmental dredging and restoration, recycling, and water and wastewater operations projects. Exhibit 3 on page 4 is showing the same data on an annual basis and showing the year-over-year change. So you can see that the largest categories of projects that grew in fiscal 24 were environmental engineering, followed by environmental dredging and restoration and environmental engineering. On page 5 now, turning over to the discussion of the fiscal 26 operating budget. Exhibit 4 is the budget data from the budget books for MES. You can see they have a fiscal 26 allowance of approximately $219.4 million, which represents a $10.4 million increase from the fiscal 25 working appropriation. The largest area of growth is in the salaries, wages, and fringe benefit category. Although MES does have independent authority over its salary, these salary increases represent salary adjustments that largely mirror statewide salary adjustments seen in other agency budgets. Operating expenses grow due to cost of goods and services, utilities, and other operational needs. Exhibit 5 on page 6 is showing budget data on reimbursable projects by state agency. You can see here that in the budget, the largest category of these are with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services for projects at correctional institutions. And the second largest category is with the DNR for Maryland State Parks. Exhibit 6 on page 7 and 8 is showing a breakdown of this data by individual projects and the budget data for fiscal 26 for each project. And then on the bottom of page 8 and 9 is discussing the other arrangement that MES uses for completing projects with state agencies, contractual projects that were completed in fiscal 24. The largest areas of these projects were dredging projects with the Maryland Port Administration and other projects with the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, along with a variety of other projects with other state agencies. Page 10 is giving the personnel data summary for MES. The fiscal 26 allowance supports approximately 785 regular full-time equivalent positions. I mentioned that MES has independent authority over its personnel. MES's annual personnel needs tend to fluctuate from year to year, depending on its actual needs of the projects and the contracts that it's involved in. On page 11 begins discussion of the MES annual funding statement. This is annually requested from MES and submitted and contains some additional information beyond what's included in the annual audited financial statements. Exhibit 7 on page 11 is showing the undesignated unrestricted net assets, which are essentially fund balance that are not constrained by other imposed stipulations and are available to cover needed technical upgrades, emergencies, or other unexpected expenditures. In fiscal 2024, these total $5.8 million, which is a decrease from the $6.7 million in fiscal 23. Exhibit 8 on page 12 is discussing the overhead rates that MES charges for all project types. You can see on the chart that overhead rates are roughly similar between fiscal 24 and 26. However, there are some decreases, the largest being in the general administrative category. The overhead rates declined by about 0.5 percentage point. Exhibit 9 on page 14 is showing the MES project reserve fund balances. These are contingency funds that allow MES to retain funds for certain projects that may change in scope or cost and allow them to move forward with those without necessitating further delay or additional budgetary action. All retainages and withdrawals from these funds are required to receive prior approval from the Department of Budget and Management, and there are statutory caps on how much can be retained in these funds in each year. As shown in Exhibit 9, you can see there's 4 different funds that are listed here. The first 3 of these are set in statute. The 4th fund was created by the MES board and terminates in fiscal 2024. Within the other 3, you can see that specifically the first 2, the State Reimbursable Project Contingency Fund and the ECI Steam Turbine Contingency Fund, have the most activity for retainages and funds used. The State Reimbursable Project Contingency Fund in fiscal 24 exceeds the $1 million cap by about $35.5 thousand, and the ECI Steam Turbine Contingency Fund is estimated in fiscal 25 to meet the $1.5 million cap. Related to this, there is one provision in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act which proposes to increase the statutory cap for those 2 funds to allow for additional funding to be retained for those projects in future years. This proposal would increase the ECI Steam Turbine Contingency Fund cap from $1.5 to $5 million and the State Reimbursable Project Contingency Fund cap from $1 million to $3 million. Lastly, on page 16, the DLS operating actions. DLS is making one recommendation to adopt committee narrative to request the annual MES funding statement. And that concludes the DLS presentation.
Thank you. And who do we have today from the MES? We have.
Good afternoon, Chair Watson, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Dr. Charles Glass. With me is also Deputy Director Ellen Friketic. First, on behalf of MES, we would like to thank Mr. Quist and the entire DLS team for their thorough analysis on both our operating and capital budgets. The only formal recommendation in the DLS analysis was for committee narrative for MES to continue to provide an MES annual funding statement. MES, of course, concurs with this recommendation. And that could end my comments if the chair wants, or I could add a minute or two of some facts.
Go ahead, we'd love to hear them,
Oh, excellent. Thank you, ma'am.
but only 2 minutes.
But I could do it. I can probably do it in one. As you know, our vacancy rate remains below our 5% target at 3.2% last Thursday. We've done this with a summer internship program that has led to several hires, and this year we're going to have a rotational fellowship program. And I believe the number is for one environmental specialist position, we've had 160 applicants. And for an open engineering position in that rotational fellowship will be a 2-year program, learning all of our groups' work. We have 42 engineers applying for one position. So
Great. And that was before the federal cutbacks?
that was before the federal,
Yeah.
it closes this Friday, but it was already robust before the federal government's actions. Our MBE numbers in FY24 was 33%, highest in my tenure. And of course, we continue to be honored in top workplaces in both the Baltimore Sun, Washington Post, and USA Today. And that's just a testament to our staff who fill out a survey, an anonymous survey, ranking us. And we just continue to hit on all cylinders. And I'm confident we'll continue. As you know, we only have 2 agencies remaining to have our long-term agreements established. We are actively working, and we commit to reporting to the subcommittee as soon as they are completed.
Yes, and I want to tell you how much we appreciate the fact that you proactively got back to us and let us know that you were working through those agreements as you said you would last year at the hearing. And we appreciate the fact that you've made so much progress, and we know that sometimes things are out of your control, and you will get the others wrapped up as soon as you can. Yeah, and you've done a really great job trying to get organized and get that agency back on track. So we appreciate your time and effort. Do we have questions? No questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. All right. We do not have anybody to testify for that. We do have the next agency is the Department of Environment. And we have Andrew Gray on this one. He will begin. And Madam Secretary, you may come forward with your people, and you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll now present the Maryland Department of the Environment's, or MDE's, fiscal 2026 operating budget analysis. Page 1 there, you see the $16.2 million increase in funding, or 7%, to $247.3 million for the agency. In terms of the managing results exhibits, start on page 8 there, and just really briefly here, that air quality was looking good. Then we had the wildfires up in Canada, and so therefore we did not meet the 8-hour ozone standard last year, but looking good generally. In terms of child blood lead, we're seeing greater testing and lower levels, but MDE was not able to provide the information that would help support this information, this presentation. Therefore, we had to get the information from the Maryland Department of Health. MDE should comment as noted on page 9 there. And then in terms of the Exhibit 3, then on page 12, concerning Public Information Act and permit data, there's no new information on the Public Information Act response rate. And in terms of the permits, there was the applications received went up, but the permits issued went down, which doesn't seem like a good trend. Then moving on to the page 13, the fiscal 2025 budget amendment. So the concern here is that for a number of years, MDE was receiving general fund subsidies deficiencies due to a lack of sufficient revenues in its major administrations. Last year, they did have a fee bill. It did not pass. As a result, they needed to come in the fall with a rather large budget amendment to bring in funding to support their administrations, which would not be able to continue doing their work past February of this year if that budget amendment did not come in. Another interesting point here, the funding that supported those increases in appropriations was from 2 large settlements, one with Purdue Agribusiness LLC for air pollution violations of the company's Salisbury soybean facility. It was $8 million over a couple of years. And there's also a $1.1 million settlement with Fleischmann's Vinegar Company. So excellent work in terms of making sure that people are kind of being held to the rule, but obviously this is not a way to fund the agency long term. We need to have more sustainable revenues to be able to continue the work the agency does. Then on page 14, brief discussion about the legislative priorities. There's only one action. There's a long-range water and wastewater infrastructure needs study for city of Hagerstown. The agency should comment on the status of that. And there's a proposed deficiency defraying $6.6 million in general funds with Strategic Energy Investment Fund special funds. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act actions. On page 15, Exhibit 4 gives you the big picture look at the agency. Emergency and support services largely built on $28 million for Chesapeake Bay bonds, revenue bonds, debt service, and then also $11 million for operations and maintenance grants for enhanced nutrient removal plants, then also for salaries. And Water and Science Administration, about $59.9 million, around a quarter of the overall agency's budget, largely due to salaries, and then also grants, and then land materials is primarily then salaries and contracts. Moving now to page 17, Exhibit 5 reflects the proposed budget. So we've already discussed the overall change in terms of what's happening here under personnel. You're seeing some rather large numbers. Some of this is due to the timing of when the COLA is being introduced, whether it's budgeted or not budgeted in the agency's budget, and therefore, unfortunately, it kind of overstates the change between the 2 years. And we'll talk a little bit about their use of the miscellaneous adjustment sub-object in a second as well, which is really concerning. Then in terms of other large changes, you're seeing there contractual conversions increase about 50 positions for $4 million or so, and around $200,000 for new regular positions. There's 3 positions on the climate change program. In terms of the environmental policy changes, just highlight here the $600,000 there for the Chapter 644 and 645 of 2024, the Radiation Emergency Preparedness and Protection Act, MDE's new requirements under that act, and that funding is there to provide for those requirements. There's also a $500,000 increase for the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Model Work Group, and that's due to legislation was also passed in the last session requiring reporting there. Then in terms of some of the concerns we have here on page 18, going on to page 19, for a number of years, Maryland Department of the Environment was budgeting almost all of its personnel expenditures, prior year personnel expenditures, in the Social Security sub-object, which basically meant we couldn't compare year to year what was going on with the personnel expenditures. They've resolved that. DLS recommends that the funding be released. That was restricted pending the resolution of that issue. The confirmatory letter was submitted. However, the MD has gone back to using miscellaneous sub-objects, which is a kind of catch-all, if you will, to describe what looks like the special fund contingent appropriations in fiscal 2026, although we'd like the agency to comment a little bit about that because it's not as completely transparent about how that sub-object is being used. Moving now to the Budget Reconciliation and Financing and other contingent legislation on page 20, and then Exhibit 6 on the following pages here. We briefly talked about the biggest change, which is noted on the kind of bottom of page 23, and that's related to the Strategic Energy Investment Fund money that was talked about in the Maryland Energy Administration analysis as well. So those are actions that are occurring in fiscal 2025, cost containment-wise, and also in fiscal 2026. So $6.6 million reduction in general funds in fiscal 25, and a $6.1 million general fund reduction in fiscal 2026, contingent on the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act allowing for authorizing the use of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund for defraying those general funds. And then in terms of some other legislation, there's Senate Bill 250, a departmental bill, has a number of fee provisions in it. That's discussed on page 28. Just note here briefly that it appears that the special fund contingent appropriations, the increase that they're thinking that they're going to be able to address or be able to kind of use in funding as a result of those fees is greater than the actual fee revenue that appears to support it. If that is in fact the case, then they would potentially need upwards of a $1.4 million general fund deficiency. DLS recommends that the agency comment on that particular situation. Bottom of page 28 and continue on the next page is Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and Inflation Reduction Act funding. Exhibit 7 back in, multi-pages here shows all the competitive funding that Maryland Department of the Environment has either been awarded or is pending. It's a substantial list. $51.4 million has been awarded. And then there's also $2.4 million that the agency is working with the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. MDE should discuss the status and so forth about that funding. Moving now to the personnel data on page 31. We talked about this briefly. 50 contractual conversions, 3 regular positions of the climate change program. Turnover rate is coming down. It's still relatively high at 10.13%. Moving now to the issues on page 33. The first issue there concerns the state climate change funding. So back in 2023, Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan was released, and they noted there was about $1 billion need in public funding to support climate change mitigation in Maryland. So what does that look like? Where are we relative to that? Well, there's a report that came out last year, reflected in Exhibit 8, which shows the big picture for greenhouse gas spending across all the state agencies, around $3.1 billion. The majority of that is 93% of that actually is the Maryland Department of Transportation for Transportation Emissions Sub-Program. And in terms of some of the other information here, the data also talks about the percent disproportionately affected communities in terms of where that funding is going to actually help out folks with climate change needs and who are disproportionately affected in general. So a tremendous amount of money coming, the state is already spending. The question is, what does this look like relative to that $1 billion need? Where does there's $1 billion on top of this? Is it included in this? And how does this chart, this kind of exhibit here, reflect kind of the agency's and the administration's thinking going forward in terms of how we're going to deal with climate change in Maryland? And also, how are they going to look at that sub-object that could help figure out exactly where all of the climate change funding is being budgeted in the state budget, and also the geo-referencing, trying to figure out where the disproportionately affected communities are so we can make sure that they're all being reflected properly in terms of whether they're getting money or not for this purpose. On page 38, this is the statewide recycling needs assessment. So chapter 465 of 2023 did have a requirement for a statewide assessment. There was some challenges there in terms of getting enough funding for it. The funding was then in place, but then there were delays further beyond that, which have delayed the actual submission of the consultant's report, which means that the Producer Responsibility Advisory Council that was supposed to use the consultant's report to then inform recommendations going forward has not been able to make their informed decisions as of February 8th, 2025. However, there is a silver lining here, the possibility for recouping some of perhaps the Maryland Department of the Environment's assessment costs related to that assessment and perhaps other assessment costs going forward by that group that's going to be kind of basically it's going to be the Producer Responsibility Program group that'll be implementing that program. So hopefully there'll be some money coming back in the state. MDE should comment on the kind of likely refinement or the completion of that assessment and on whether we're expecting any money from the Circular Action Alliance, the Producer Responsibility Organization. The page 38, number 3 issue there, Building Energy Performance Standards. So the General Assembly adopted language in the fiscal 2025 budget that restricted funding to not be used for final submission and completion of the energy use intensity targets and standards regulations. The idea being, let's kind of have some more reporting provided before we kind of go through to that final step. So it was a little confusing because the agency did go forward with regulations, but those regulations were not inclusive of that final energy use intensity targets information. That information is not available yet. That won't be available till the end of fiscal 2026, and therefore they can't actually put together the final component of the report that was requested until fiscal 2027. So the money, they have not used the money inappropriately, and we're at where we need to be. In terms of funding need, there's about $1 million that was noted last year that was needed for an online assessment system for the Building Energy Performance Standards. It's not clear whether that's in the budget. MDE should comment on the outcomes that they've been doing in terms of their trainings for the Building Energy Performance Standards and about whether any of that money is in the budget as well. Maryland Used Tire Cleanup and Recycling Fund, things look good. People are cleaning up the scrap tires on their own, which is fantastic. We'd love to see the report again. DLS recommends the submission of that report as well. Then enforcement inspection, position strength assessment, and vacant position filling on page 41. That report was not submitted in time for the completion of this analysis. It has been submitted since then. DLS does recommend the MDE comment on why the report was not submitted, and then to recommend that narrative be included again going forward for the next fiscal year. And then finally, Just note here about two of the Maryland Department of the Environment's information technology projects that appear to be, well, it's concerning because they've moved from one particular model of using the one-stop vendor to now moving kind of using this agile consulting services. So it sounds interesting, sounds more flexible, sounds like there could be cost savings, but the Maryland Department of Environment's Wells and Septic Portal project, one of the two projects, looks like it's going to actually cost more. And then the information, the supporting information for these projects reflects that the risk factors have gone up significantly for a number of the categories for these projects. DLS recommends you should discuss the reason for changing to this different model and should discuss the kind of the reason for the cost increase for that one particular project when assuming that one of the reasons why we're doing this is to kind of reduce the costs. And also MDE should discuss the overall relationship between these particular projects and its overall modernization strategy. The recommended actions on page 42. This first one there, I jumped over, unfortunately, is the Clean Water Commerce Act account recommendation. There's $20 million budgeted each year for the purpose of non-point source pollution reduction. This is a kind of pay-for-performance model. However, due to the fiscal situation of the state, it appears that a $20 million break could be taken, and that money could be used to defray operating expenses. And that's the language that's noted right here. That would be contingent on a Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act basically the approval through that process. Then there's the two reports noted that DLS recommended, the used tire and enforcement inspection. And then on the bottom of page 43 is that Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act provision. And is there any questions? That concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. I think we will move right to the agency's testimony, and then we'll open it up to questions. Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment, and I really do appreciate this opportunity to be here to talk about our fiscal year 2026 operating budget of $247.3 million, which is a 7% increase this year. I know that all of us are well aware and we understand the fiscal challenges that our state is facing, and that's why I really do believe that this budget is appropriate because it's based solely on funding just the essential investments so that we can continue to protect the environment and support Maryland's growing economy. And I also know that in order for us to ensure that we have a budget that is sufficient, we need to make sure that we are efficient in our operations, and that is why I have spent a considerable amount of time since I started in transforming our operations. We've taken out red tape all across all of our processes, and we've eliminated non-value steps. We've improved customer service to all the people that we serve across Maryland, and we are literally watching every single dollar that we spend. And now I just want to highlight just a few accomplishments that I think will demonstrate the progress that we're making. We have more inspectors, so that means the number of inspections have increased by 31%. Our climate program is now fully funded and fully staffed, not funded, staffed. And so that way, because of that, we're able to focus a lot more on implementing the climate goals that are required in law. We've planted 1 million trees. That's almost twice as much as last year. And I think that is a good demonstration that we're making a lot of progress in trying to get to the 5 million tree goal by 2031. We've also restored 365 acres of brownfields, and we know that when we do that, when we're turning contaminated land into productive and useful and safe spaces, we're benefiting local economies. So for me, that is a really, really big win. Recently, and I know, Andrew, you spoke of it, and by the way, thank you again for your analysis and all the information that you brought forward to us, and we have addressed your questions. We submitted them already, so I just wanted to make sure I say that. But you did mention the historic enforcement settlements that we've had at MDE, and I think that's just a demonstration of how we are holding violators accountable, and we will make sure that we are protecting public health. And we also reduced zombie permits, which are really the administratively extended permits. We've reduced them by 81%, and we're hoping to get to 0 by the end of this year. And as I said earlier, we're working diligently to make sure that we are more efficient and that we're saving taxpayers' money. I'll give you two real quick examples. Cell phones. We saved $100,000 by simply changing the cell phone provider. That's little things like that add up. We also saved $53,000 by simply removing desks off of our desk that we weren't using, old technology. So little things like that. I just wanted to give you a quick example. We're also developing an online permitting system so that we can start first making permits more automated, and we're also digitizing the records that we have. And all this is really a part of process improvement for the agency. And last, we're really hoping this year to address some of our unfunded programs that are being paid by taxpayers instead of the customers. And this is costing the state $14 million in general funds when we could simply be collecting those funds by increasing the fees and making sure that we're getting the right amount of money coming in. And last, I said last, but really last, I know we're all concerned about the federal challenges that we're all facing, and I just want to say that we are monitoring all of it, everything that's going on. Some of our funds, our grants are impacted by it, but we're watching it. Sometimes it's frozen, then it's unfrozen. So it's just some uncertainty that's going on, but we are paying attention to that. That is it for me. Thank you.
All right,
Do you have any
thank you.
questions?
Yes, we do. Who would like to begin? Delegate Salomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's nice to see you, Madam Secretary. Sorry, I'm just, of course, now my computer wants to freeze, which I have my questions printed on it.
I can.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay.
And again, it's good to see you. And I have to say, I want to give you kudos for hiring one of District 18's finest, Rick Kessler, to be the new head of the Land Administration. Really happy to get him from the EPA here. So thank you for that, and congratulations, Rick. I had two questions for you. One on one of the BRFA proposals to increase the fee for the lead certification for rental properties. I just wanted to know, the BRFA description didn't really have a lot of information as to where that's going, and that's a pretty big increase from 30 to 120 overall, and I know it's being split into two. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Rick.
Okay.
But just curious, like, is that going to additional certification? Is that going into the program overall to backfill other things that we're not able to fund? Because it just says that's going into special fund piece.
I don't want to give you the wrong information, so let me turn to staff. Oh, see, you gave Rick, you see, now you get to ask him the question.
On the spot, Rick.
All right. We could just talk just very quickly of where those funds are going.
Yeah, so I think you touched upon most of it. It is going for more certification, better training, just better surveillance overall, better results.
Okay, great. So, that's what I expected. Just, I know we're cognizant of things on housing, so just wanted to ask that. And then, Madam Secretary, I guess this is more for you.
Okay.
Can you explain to me, so, as putting on my joint audits co-chair hat, and we also oversee the Department of Information Technology, it's been a lot of conversations of late about the way that we handle our major IT infrastructure projects. And so there's a contract currently up for Agile. I'm wondering if you can just sort of walk me through what exactly the process was with these two contracts. Were there any resources spent on the one stop to begin with? Did we spend any money that now we're looking at recouping? And then talk me maybe through the transition to Agile instead.
Yeah, I don't have specifics, like details like that you're asking about those two contracts, about transforming the IT infrastructure at MDE. It is an initiative that I asked my agency to do. But in terms of the exact like how we actually came up with the funding. I'm going to turn it over to you because I know IT is under business operations under CHIA, so I'll let you speak in a second. But I will say, and you mentioned this too, Andrew, it does seem like there's an upfront cost that costs more, and the whole point is that we're trying to save money. But sometimes when we're doing these contracts, it is more money up front, but it's the long term that that's where we're going to reap those benefits.
Yeah, I am less concerned, I'll just be honest, I'm less concerned about the upfront costs. So we have seen, and we'll do it in here next week, but we have seen, I mean, literally almost every audit filing that we get from the Office of Legislative Audits has just ridiculous cost overruns. And that's not for you, that's literally every agency in the state government. And we are having, I think, a very existential conversation about what the role of DO-IT is within state government. And literally it's, these open-ended contracts where we don't put metrics in place, we don't put milestones into place. The vendor then turns around and overcharges the state millions and millions of dollars for systems that then don't work. And we are left holding the bag to the tune of literally hundreds of millions of dollars across state government. And DO-IT and the Office of Innovation that the governor has set up is trying to fix that. But I think, again, that is a much broader conversation. So it's something that I am particularly interested in every agency that comes before us, and making sure that these contracts are not open-ended, that there are very clear, measurable points in time where we can go back to the contractor and say, if you haven't hit this status, we want the money back. And so, yours is relatively small compared to some of the gigantic sums we're seeing in other agencies. But since this is before us, that was, and we can follow up offline off of that. Yeah. I don't want to derail our conversation, but just that is an area where the amount of money that we are spending as a state government is just off the charts for what seems to be not a very good return on our investment.
Well, thanks for bringing it to my attention. I will definitely pay attention to it and get back in touch with you about what I find.
Okay, great. And we can follow up as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Delegate Solomon, you may have questions for our analysts who can provide them to you in writing. Okay. I think that would be a good idea. That's a very important topic. Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very quick follow-up on Delegate Solomon's point before I ask a couple other questions, if I may. I did notice that in your written response from the agency, you said that on the IT project that costs decreased because of MDE's own internal project team, which sort of raised the flag for me about, are we talking about the savings coming from switching over to Do It Agile, or are we talking about the savings coming from MDE's own internal team? So just a quick follow-up, something to think about. I had a few other questions on some specific aspects that I'm hoping I can just get some sort of relatively quick responses on, and happy to follow up offline as well. First, on the issue of the permit applications, I noticed that your written response talked about the number of permits issued and the number of permits in effect for the fiscal year, but didn't exactly answer the question of why there's a sort of a significant delta between the number of applications versus the number of permits issued in the year. I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I think that would probably be you, Lee, to talk about those permits, the increases. Okay. Because thank you. We did address that with our response back, and it sounds like you're trying to get a little bit more information on the delta between the increase and what we had this year. You want to speak about that just quickly?
Yes. Good afternoon. For the record, Lee Curry, Director of the Water and Science Administration. I think what we need to talk about is, it says permits issued, and I'm wondering if it's actually permits that are like in place at the time. The reason I say that is because one example is there's a permit that we have for construction activity. It's a general permit. We have 6,000 registrations under it. Every 5 years we renew it. When we move to the next permit, a lot of those sites have been constructed and they're just no longer applicable. So when we moved to the next permit, we went from 6,000 to zero permits that were valid to 2,000, a little over 2,000 after validating them all. So that dropped 4,000. So I think what it looks like sometimes is we shifted and we had 4,000 less permits that were active because we cleaned up our records, which happens at a certain interval during these general permits. That explains one piece of it.
Thank you. That's helpful. I had another question about the used tire cleanup fund balance and just sort of, in general, the status of the program work. It looks like it's been making good progress, but I did note that it looks like there are no new stockpiles. Obviously, that doesn't mean it couldn't change tomorrow if somebody did a new dumping, but you have about 500,000 tires remaining and $3.6 million or so in the balance of the program. Can you talk about, sort of what's the projected cost of finishing up the work on those 500,000 tires and the expectations projected outward of what's needed in the fund for potential future work?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to turn that over to you, Rick, since that's your program.
Yep, not a problem. Yes, you're right. They are coming down. We've made a significant dent in the backlog, but I think our fee proposal is going to be very helpful in getting kind of funding we need to finish that work and just to keep the program moving along. But it's a incredibly important part. As I've learned in the month here, I've gotten a ton of questions from around the state about it, so it's very front and center.
Okay. Speaking of the fees that you mentioned in the fee proposal, there's one particular fee that I've been asked a lot about, so I'm going to ask you all about it, and that's the BEPS annual reporting fee. I'm wondering if anybody can talk about that proposal and what that exactly looks like and who's supposed to pay it.
I'll be happy to turn that over to you, Chris. This is your program. So
Thank you for the question. For the record, I'm Chris Hoagland, the Director of the Air and Radiation Administration. So that is part of our bill adding flexibility mechanisms to the Building Energy Performance Standard, or BEPS program, which is a regulation required by Climate Solutions now. One of the elements of that bill is adding a modest annual reporting fee to the covered buildings. So buildings larger than 35,000 square feet, with some exceptions, are covered by this regulation. They report annually their emissions and energy use. We are proposing to add a $100 annual fee. These are large buildings, so $100 is a very modest amount, but there are many of those buildings. So we project it could raise as much as $1 million per year that we would use to complete staffing for the Climate Solutions Now Act. It would provide enough funds for us to hire up to meet the fiscal note from that bill several years ago, and also to maintain a better online system for the buildings. So we'd have more people to answer the phone when buildings call and to help them work through their issues complying with the program.
And I'll just say, more importantly, too, it helps us reduce general funds and asking for more funds to support that program that's unfunded.
Just a couple more quick questions, if I may, Madam Chair. The Hagerstown contract that has not been executed yet, it's worth about $250,000. Will that revert at the end of FY25 if it hasn't been finalized?
I'll let you answer that. I know that we're waiting on Hagerstown. I don't know if you're aware of that. Okay, we're waiting on them.
No, I'm not casting any blame on you all. I'm just asking what happens to the money if Hagerstown doesn't get back to you, or if it just never gets finalized.
Yeah, I don't know what happens to the money if it reverts back, but we're working with Hagerstown, so hopefully we can get that sorted out this year, or with this budget.
Okay, and then last question on the Clean Water Commerce account. The DLS analysis suggested a potential pause for a year or use of the funds to defray the operating expenses of the Water and Science Administration. In your response, you all did not agree with that, but the analysis from DLS did discuss the fact that apparently they're still ranking projects from the FY24 solicitation, and that might be a reason why it's worth pausing that program. I'm wondering if anybody's able to kind of further respond to why you all are opposed to that under those circumstances, with the solicitation taking a little bit longer than we expected.
Sure, for a variety of reasons. One, those projects have been awarded. So there was a ranking that took place, and then there's an award that went in place. Right? All those have been awarded, right? So first, all those have been awarded. So I think that's a real challenge. And two, the Clean Water Commerce Act, the way we award, it's really a performance-based program. So it's trying to find the most cost-effective pollution reductions, and I think that's just a great example of how we best use state funds to pay for pollution reductions. So just kind of two reasons that we pushed back against that idea.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Metzger.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, and your staff for being here. It's always a delight and a treat to see you. It wouldn't be Department of Environment Day if I didn't ask the question, where are we at with Back River wastewater treatment plant? There's several rumors in my community that you're trying to outsource it, and I need to find out if that's true or what we're doing.
Thank you for that. That is in fact a rumor.
Wonderful.
Yes, we're not trying to do anything of the sort. But to answer your first question about where are we, and I'll say it as I did last year, you would be very happy to know that Back River and Patapsco is back on track. They have not fallen backwards. Again, we do have the early warning system that I talked about, and that system has been instrumental in letting us see problems first and them so that they can respond quickly. So we have a good system in place where we're much more aware of what's going on. We're still doing our inspections. We were inspecting once a month when it was really bad, and then we went to quarterly. We are now at yearly. But we're still calling, and again, the early warning system, we're still working with them. We have a great partnership. I think we're in good shape.
I hope so, and I will say that in the last few weeks, that when I come out of my house, it has been not so bad. It's amazing when I go past on on weekends or something, it's just a disaster. And I just know it's got to be a health issue for that horrible smell. So, but it's not been as bad in the last few weeks, so I will compliment you on that. So I just thank you for ending the rumor, for doing away with that. So thank you.
Well, it may be a rumor, but it's not anything we're doing.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Delegate Edelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all. Great to see you. Thank you for your presentation. Quick question about the departmental bill that you have this year. It's my understanding from the analysis from Mr. Gray that even if we pass it as is, it will still be short of the amount that you need. Can you give us a sense of why that is? If the goal is to not need general funds, why would it be, 1.5 or so million short?
I think the way that was stated is it's a little, no offense, but a little complicated even for me to kind of understand that, because the fees that we have in that bill will cover the funds that we need to continue to operate. So I may have to dig into that a little bit more to try and understand why it looks like there's a deficit, unless I'm missing anything, Dean?
I think I could add just one example for the air and radiation fees, which are on the list there.
Yeah.
Our projected fee revenues change as the weather changes, as facility operations change, because that's an emissions-based fee, so it's collected based on how much pollution sources emit. So when we updated to the latest projections with the latest quarter of data, we were projecting 1.9 million instead of 2.25 million. That number moves around, and so we wouldn't necessarily need a $300,000 deficiency for that, because we have other sources of funding that we're anticipating, including penalties that will easily cover that amount. So the department is not asking for a deficiency for general funds in that amount.
Okay, so you don't expect to need a 1.4 million deficiency appropriation based on if that bill passes as is?
That is correct.
Okay.
Did you?
Great, thank you.
Did you have
I was just going to say, I think in terms of the mining fee, the non-coal mining fee, that fee hasn't been increased since 1992 when Taylor Swift was 3 years old and George Bush was president, the first one. And since then, since 2009, that program's been expected to do pretty much all the inspections regarding all those mines. And so even right now, our fees cover 1/4 of that. So even with the increase, my estimation is we will probably still need. That's assuming we got the full increase with the caps being lifted to where they are.
Well, the Swifties out there might not love you comparing her to coal and
I'm just saying, that's how long it's been.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely a first, a reference to Taylor Swift in our hearings. And we have Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, and your team for being here. I just had a quick question in regards to the almost $3 billion and change that we're spending on the climate change issue. I guess my concern or question would be, are there numbers or studies that are being done on the cost of it? I guess how, like, to fully implement the Climate Solutions Now Act and how that's going to affect the private sector and the cost on a lot of our business. I know we had the buildings issue, and I'm just concerned that a lot of these environmental regulations that we put forth with some of our bills is really going to add up when it comes to what it's going to cost some of our business people out there. So I don't know if there's any numbers that you can refer to.
I appreciate your question. I really do, and I understand where it's coming from. In terms of the Climate Solutions Now Act, there's a requirement that we have to make sure that we conduct an economic analysis on everything that we do, on all the policies that we implement. It's clear in there that we have to make sure that there's not an economic burden on Marylanders and on industry. And I know you probably want to say a little bit more about that, but so we have to make sure that we're not creating that kind of burden. It is a big ticket item. It is a lot of money that we need in order to fund the climate transformation that we have to do in Maryland. But again, we do look at the economic analysis and how that's going to impact Marylanders and industry.
And that might be something offline. I can reach out to you for a copy of that. I'm sure I would love to see, and I'm sure a lot of people would love to see that information.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Actually, it's also in the Climate Pollution Reduction Plan, and I'll make sure you get a copy of that. All the modeling and all the economic analysis is in that plan. But we can give you more, too, and have a one-on-one with you so we can go through it with you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, Delegate? Nope. All right, any other questions for Maryland Environmental? Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did just have one other question, and I know you mentioned it just briefly in your remarks, and I know it's in the response on the statewide recycling needs assessment. So there's the million that was originally budgeted for the HDR contract with HDR, the assessment contract with HDR Engineering was only 667. So does that 333,000 go back? Is that being repurposed for anything else, or?
Do you want to address that?
Yeah, that's not something, and for the record, Rick Kessler, I'm the Director of the Lands and Materials Administration. I forgot to say that earlier. Delegate Solomon, that's not something I know off the top of my head, okay. But I do know that the Advisory Council in their most recent recommendations did call for reimbursement for the needs assessment. So that's something I think we're very interested in.
Okay. So, that was going to be my next question, and we can talk more offline about that. But I know
happy to do that.
The whole point of the provider or the producer responsibility is to incorporate the cost of things on their end. So right. I was glad to hear that was likely going to be the recommendation. Would love to see that report. Now that I guess it sounds like it's public.
It went public Friday.
Okay.
So
great.
Happy to.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much for being here. We do have a couple of people here to testify. Kim Coble and Mac Stegman. I assume, Eric, are you testifying as well? No. Okay, just Kim. I'm moving. My head is moving.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Kim Coble, Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters. And I'll be brief. I'm here to urge you to adopt the governor's budget as proposed for Maryland Department of the Environment. In addition to my role as Executive Director, I co-chair the Maryland Commission on Climate Change with Secretary McElwain. So I work very closely with staff and with the agency and have found them to be remarkably responsive, professional, knowledgeable, and frankly awesome. And as mentioned earlier, the Environment Committee, the environment agencies have taken what equates to about 28% cut from the proposed budget so far, and we urge that nothing more be taken at this point. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Matt Stegman, I'm the Maryland staff attorney for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Also here to ask you to support the budget for the Department of the Environment as supported by the, submitted by the governor. MDE plays a really outsized role in the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay, particularly through its permitting and enforcement functions. Having robust inspections and permitting is something that's really important for communities, and the replacement of out-of-date and insufficient zombie permits, it really has a tremendous impact on our waterways. Just as a brief example, the Fleischmann vinegar settlement that Mr. Gray mentioned, that's a facility that's about a half a mile from my house in Baltimore. The section of the Jones Falls that it would befoul is a place that I've gone hiking with my kids, so I can tell you from personal experience that having robust inspections and permitting and having an agency that is able to robustly enforce our environmental laws has a direct impact on communities. So for that reason, would just ask you to please support the budget as submitted by the governor. Thank you.
We really appreciate you both being here and all the work and advocacy you do for the environment in Maryland. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we are finished with the Department of the Environment, which means we are moving on to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Transportation, where we have Steve McCullough and Secretary Wiedefield come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McCullough with Department of Legislative Services here to present the Secretary's Office for the Maryland Department of Transportation. As you can see on page 1, the fiscal 2026 allowance for the operating for the Secretary's Office increased by $13.3 million, 11.7%. However, the 2025 working appropriation does not reflect a budget amendment that's been processed that adds $6.2 million to the fiscal 2025. Taking that into account, the budget for the Secretary's Office increases by $7.1 million, or just under 6%. Turning to page 5 for the Managing for Results discussion. The first item, Exhibit 1 on page 5, shows the number department-wide of filled positions. Because vacancy rates can be affected by position additions and abolitions, I always like to look at the number of filled positions by year to get a good indication of what the full complement of people addressing the needs of the department are. As you can see on that Exhibit 1, that in January 1st of 2025, there were 70 more positions filled than there had been a year prior, and it is the largest number of filled positions basically going back to 2016. On page 8, Exhibit 6, Exhibit 2 shows system preservation funding. The solid bars are the actual spending amounts, and the two striped bars are the current year and the budget year projection. The Spending Affordability Committee in its 2024 interim report recommended, following requirement in the statute that they make a recommendation on system preservation funding, recommended that no less than $1.14 billion be spent for system preservation in fiscal 2026. That equaled the 10-year average the department had done over the previous 10 years. You can see the red line on that last bar is the recommended SAC recommendation, so the fiscal 2026 budget does exceed that currently by $65 million. The overview of agency spending chart, Exhibit 3 on page 8, shows that just over 43% of the Secretary's budget is devoted to supporting the technology services for the entire department. So another 41% goes for departmental administration, and the final 16% is given away as operating grants and aid. The proposed budget chart begins on page 9. This is Exhibit 4. As I mentioned at the beginning, $13.3 million increase. Of that, $4.1 million is in the personnel section. For departmental administration increased by $6.1 million. The largest, $3.4 million, is the restoration of funding cost containment that was made in last year's budget. And then operating grants and aid increased by $1.3 million. And those operating grants can be seen listed on page 11. I would just note 2 items of increase from the current year. The $400,000 for the Department of Planning. This was a grant that was reduced. It's been a long time grant, but had been reduced last year for its cost containment. That is restored. And then for the first time, there's a Purple Line Business Impact Grant, $1 million showing up in the budget. This is actually money that will be reimbursed by the Purple Line partners, but help businesses that are impacted by the construction of that project. Turning to page 12, the personnel, the Secretary's Office receives 1 new operating position, 5 new capital positions in the allowance. As you've seen in other modes, we are recommending the operating position be denied. Not that the position itself is not needed, but rather the department should seek to reclassify a vacant position given the fiscal conditions of the state. The PAYGO capital program discussion begins on page 12 with the IIJA grant awards over the past year shown on Exhibit 6 on page 13. Through the Secretary's Office, there have been 9 grants totaling $127.8 million received over the past year. On page 14, Exhibit 7 shows the 6-year capital program for the Secretary's Office, which totals $162 million over the 6 years, which is a $9.5 million decrease from the previous 6-year program. The Secretary's fiscal 2026 allowance is shown in Exhibit 8 on page 15. It totals $36.2 million, and you can see the projects and the programs that make that up. The cash flow analysis on page 16, Exhibit 9, shows that there was an increase between the legislative appropriation and the working appropriation in 25 of $27.5 million. There's a decrease about that amount. It's $27.9 million between the working and the allowance. And this kind of shows the ebbs and flows as project funding maybe flow out of one year, push forward or pulled back, and then adjustments are made in the 2 years on either side. The cash flow changes for 2025 are shown in Exhibit 10 on page 17, and between the working and the allowance are shown in Exhibit 11 on page 18. On page 19, the first year funding chart, Exhibit 12, shows that for the Secretary's Office, $1 million of the $36.2 million, representing 3%, is first year funding, with the majority of it being ongoing. Those first year funded projects are shown on page 20 in Exhibit 13. Issues section begins on page 21. The first issue is the new focus on transit-oriented development. Chapters 122 and 123 of 2008 had established a TOD designation process that the Secretary of MDOT would designate TOD areas. The Chapter 512 of 2023, however, changed the process both in how TODs are designated, and also that legislation in 2023 created a TOD revolving loan fund and required submission of annual reports. The change in designation from Chapter 512 went to the state's Sustainable Growth Cabinet as the designating agency upon recommendation by the Secretary. As I indicated, there was a establishment of a TOD revolving loan fund with a mandated $5 million at the beginning of each fiscal year, and annual report beginning of November of 2024. The 14 designated TODs are shown on page 22. And with respect to the TOD revolving loan fund, no funds have been expended to date. However, back in June of last year, the subcabinet had established the eligibility and scoring criteria, and MDOT did issue a notice at the beginning of this month of funding opportunities and is currently accepting applications for that. We've asked the Secretary to brief the committees on what the expectation of utilization of that fund will be going forward. The second issue on page 23, very short. Last year, the Joint Chairman's Report requested a report on projects that had been forced out of the capital program due to the increases in the Purple Line project. That report, as of the printing of this, had not been submitted. It has been now submitted, but we've asked the Secretary to explain what's in that report. The recommendations begin on page 24. The first one is related to the one cybersecurity position. To deny the current funding, recommend that a vacant position be reclassified. Recommendation number 2 on that page is annual budget bill language requiring the grants and aid, restricting it to that amount without notification of the committees. And the PAYGO on page 25 is annual budget bill language requiring a notification to changes in the capital program. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Secretary for the record.
Is your mic on?
Very good.
Okay.
So since I've been in front of the committee several times, I will go through a lot of the preamble here. I will turn to DLS's questions and responses. The DLS did announce the focus on the efforts of TOD, which is very important, and they've asked for a response on the update of it. We did release notice of funding opportunity on February 5th, and we'll be accepting applications under this program until April 8th. The second of 2 information sessions will be held on March 4th to provide interested applicants with more information. For the first round of applications, we estimate awarding just under $4 million of the $5 million. And in future years, we expect the $5 million to be fully utilized each year. Those award announcements are expected to be made in June of this year, so in this fiscal year. The second issue we were asked to address is the JCR report that was delayed. That report has been submitted, as was mentioned by Steve, and it is included in our written response. Basically, it asks 2 questions. Did we use any money in '24? Did we delay any projects in fiscal year '24 to deal with some of the Purple Line issues? And the answer is no, just given the ebbs and flows of the capital program. And in the same question was asked for fiscal year '25. And again, the answer is no, because of the revenue increase that was done last year. So that's why it did not impact any projects. That's the basic answer to what was requested. In regard to DLS recommendations, there are 3 recommended actions. 2 of these are annual pieces of budget bill language that the department concurs with. The third is in regard to requests for a new position at TSO. This position is supplement our cybersecurity at MDOT. MDOT's network supports the operations of the entire department, includes significant amount of safety, sensitive information for our critical transportation infrastructure, and personally identifiable information for Maryland's drivers and businesses. And unfortunately, as you can imagine, there are many bad actors out there trying to get into our system. In January alone, there were roughly 6.7 million potential malicious events to our network, none of which were successful. But we need to continue to maintain a top-notch security team at MDOT to make sure that no one does get through to our system. That concludes my remarks. I'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you for that. I'll start off with that cybersecurity position. I don't think we object to your need for that. The question is, why can't you redirect one of the 40 vacant positions to it?
Obviously, every one of those positions we feel are important. It's interesting, if you look at the chart on page 5, Exhibit 1.
Can you say which page number again?
I'm sorry?
5?
Yes, page 5, Exhibit 1. If you just look at the total number of employees that we've had at the department, it's been flat for a decade as the system has grown, as the challenges we're facing. So that's why we're trying to maintain all those vacant positions for all the different types of needs that over time we probably have not been beating to where we should be.
Okay. That's a good answer. back to the purple line, that delay in that report, what was your thinking on that delay?
It was finalizing the CTP. As you know, a lot of the things that came to final decision were very late in the process and was submitted in January 15th as part of our overall budget. So it was, as we were focused on some of that, it did slip some. So that is our mistake.
So basically, you're saying that there was enough money eventually funded in the transportation plan to not impact any current projects based on what the purple line costs were?
Yes.
In what we had to do for the purple line?
Yes.
In the last budget?
Yes.
Okay. Questions from Delegate Spiegel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, always good to see you. There was a line item that caught the eye of myself and a couple of my colleagues that I just wanted to ask about. It was a one-time pilot project for K through 12 transportation in Baltimore County and Montgomery County for $250,000 each for a total of $500,000. Looks like it was not used, and presumably those funds will revert at the end of FY25. But we're just curious, do you know anything about the backstory of this one-time pilot project, how it came about?
Yeah. I apologize, I do not, but let me research it if I could and get back to you, Delegate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Solomon.
Nope. Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Secretary. Good to see you. I feel like we get to see you at least once or twice a week, and I appreciate you being here. I guess I had two questions, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate. I know we had this conversation with MTA folks last week, and I know I'm going to be meeting with the administrator, but just want to reiterate the incredible desire of folks on our side of the state and the corridor improvements for the Brunswick line, which I know we're still trying to sort of figure out how that factors into the overall CTP, but didn't want to miss just one last opportunity to say, I know we missed our opportunity in the fall because of the budget situation, and now we're looking at a much better budget, really constructively figuring out how we can continue to make improvements. I know folks in Montgomery and Frederick and Western Maryland are just incredibly excited that we will finally have an opportunity to get some added service. So just wanted to reiterate that. And then I guess just two relatively quick questions on the TOD fund. So you all expect about 75% of that fund to get out the door essentially before fiscal year 25 ends,
yes.
Which would leave us about 1.25. But then you all have earmarked about $5 million to replenish the fund for FY26. But if we're only getting, does that leave us 1.25, give or take, left over for something else if we don't get the full amount out the door?
I guess it could.
Okay.
Not guess, but it could. I think we'll want to take a hard look at what's come in terms of the projects.
Okay. And obviously, I know that was a big priority of many of us to get, especially a lot of these MARC stations up and running for economic growth. So glad to see that that's getting out the door. And then just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the MDOT FEMAS refactoring project. I'm not super familiar with that. I know it's a fairly expensive IT upgrade, but wondering again, if you were sitting in here for a conversation with the folks at MDE, if you could talk through sort of where we are with that and what the costs have looked like on that.
Sure. I will have to give you more details on that, but a lot of it, and I think what you probably heard from the other agencies, is a lot of our systems are just so antiquated, and particularly with the speed of what's happening in technology, that we have to get those up to standards, and that's what's behind it.
Yeah.
But I can give you more details, or to get you more details.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Following up on the TOD grants, can you give us an example of what types of grants you will be issuing? To do what and to what types of organizations?
Some of it may be to help with the design of what physically they're talking about there, working with communities to get support for them. So there's a number of aspects, as you can imagine, and eventually a deal needs to be made with different developers. So it's sort of all the above.
Is there a max on a cap on the grant that you will provide to anyone?
Not specifically that I'm aware of on the grant. In terms of the annual expenditure, it's the $5 million, which is we just talked about.
But I mean, that doesn't go very far, really.
No, but this is a joint effort. That's the whole concept, is that it's a public-private in most of the cases.
Got it.
And issue that we're wrestling with.
So we may ask for some reporting on that as the year progresses, since you're just starting that program?
Yes.
And so we can justify the funding going forward.
Very good.
Delegate Edelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you, Mr. Secretary. Great to see you feeling healthy and doing well. One more follow-up on the TOD question, which is we obviously have 14 state designated sites right now. My understanding is about 4 in the hopper. Do you have a sense on how many potential we have? Because obviously in this period of time, what we have to look to is economic growth. And this is such a great economic growth program if we do it right. And it's something that, frankly, the state hasn't done with any particular urgency until recently. So I'm trying to get a sense of what the total landscape is of potential designated sites there might be.
Thank you, Delegate. I don't have an exact number for you, but the way that I think about it, the way I view it is if the supporting local land use and, policies are there, then they're all eligible. And basically, we got to look for opportunities to maximize those facilities that we own, again, for ridership, for economic growth, for community building, things of that sort. But as you know, different communities have different views of TOD. So we particularly want to work with people that are eager to do something and where it makes a lot of sense financially. So those will be our highest priorities, and that's sort of what we've outlined already. And that's why we sort of have this process to make sure that people are engaged and want to really move on something.
Sure. And the hope being that at some point other communities look at those and say, hey, that's actually pretty good. Maybe we'd like that as well.
Yes, and I'm sure you know we hear that quite a bit in the Baltimore region versus the Washington region when they see things occur in the Washington region, on some of the TOD that's occurred down there. Why don't we have similar things either at MARC or light rail or metro? We have some of it, but to the degree they tend to look at that, and so that is also the seed to do other things as well.
Right. One question for you on the Kim Lamphere Bikeways Network program. Looking at the locations of construction, design, I think that's such a great program. And to me, it's almost calling it what it is oversimplifies it, right? Because every lane of bikeways that we build is also traffic calming. It's also less fatalities. It's also congestion easing. I'm curious if you have a sense of, we have a finite amount of money. But if that wasn't the case, what the extent of the total need and desire is for this program around the state. My understanding is we get requests for this program from every part of the state, correct me if I'm wrong, just to get a sense of what the total desire is out there for this program.
It's very strong, and it's good that you mentioned it's literally all over the state. It isn't just in urbanized areas. It's literally in Western Maryland, Eastern Shore, 611 down on the Eastern Shore, which goes between US 50 and Assateague, State Park and Federal Park is a good example of that. It literally is all over the state.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Is there any particular factor driving the increase in legal costs on page 9? Legal services?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, but let me double check if I could. I just don't.
810,000 more than last year?
Nothing jumps to mind right now, but let me, if I could follow up.
Delegate Solomon?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the second bite at the apple. Mr. Secretary, I did have one other question that I wanted to just sort of give you an opportunity to talk about. Obviously, the presentation that you all submitted has a really large amount of information on the declining gas tax revenue that you all are projecting, which I think many of us kind of know. It's a good story that our cars are getting much more fuel efficient and that we're altering the way that we, the way that we think about our cars, but it also means that the way we fund our transportation obviously has got to change. So just sort of curious if you could talk, I know MDOT did a pilot program on a vehicle miles traveled program. Can you talk sort of what your vision is on how we're going to address this going forward for the next couple of years?
Sure. I think that is, the way that we want to address it is to make sure we're doing it sort of with our surrounding neighbors, meaning other states, so that we don't create some program that basically disadvantages Maryland. And that's why the one pilot program is part of a whole Northeast corridor effort to make sure we're thinking through the potential implications of that. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's a national issue. It impacts the federal government and the fuel tax revenue they get, which then turns back to the states. So we're all trying to wrestle with that. I think clearly with some of the trends right now on pure electric vehicles. We may have to also adjust that thinking because that is evolving, as we know. So I think it's definitely one that's in place still. But I think at the end of the day, we know that the motor fuel tax revenue we get is not going to be at the level that we historically have gotten, and we have to think of other ways to basically. And again, it's the basic theory is that it's a user-supported system. We all benefit from it. You know, everything in this room was brought to us by a truck, right? Is the reality, and it went on the road somewhere. So we have to figure out ways to make sure that the users do support the system that they want.
Are there any takeaways from the pilot program that you would share?
I think it's the pilot program. I participated in it. People tend to think that it's going to basically somehow monitor every movement they do and things of that sort. You get over that pretty quickly once you participate in it. It's like, no, that really isn't what it is. It's very simple. You don't even think about it once you engage in it. So I think over time, I think that will change.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Mangione.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And unfortunately, he stole my question, but I'll just ask on top of that, you don't actually anticipate that being on top of a gas tax or in spite of?
I don't know. I think it would be, you know, where's the whole marketplace start to shift, right? Maybe it is sort of a replacement of. Maybe there's something, I mean, even what we've done in the state in terms of creating revenue from electric vehicles and the purchase of electric vehicles is sort of, you know, it's a hybrid way of trying to get at this issue of basically not getting much tax revenue through motor fuel, right? And that's why we charge now for some electric vehicles, you know, a fee for that because you're using the system, but yet we're still charging the motor fuel tax. So I think it's to be determined into the future.
All right, I hope not. Unfortunately, in my opinion, I mean, that seems like quite a burden on the user to have not only a gas tax, but then a mileage tax on top of that. But I guess we'll see what, how more of the evidence, I guess the Eastern, what was the Eastern something that did the pilot program? Okay. Well, thank you. I guess we'll be revisiting that. Thanks, sir.
It's not happening this year, but Delegate Mangione will keep an eye on it.
Yeah. And I
we
believe
can count on him.
I believe there was legislation that Senator Reedy had pretty much to say we shouldn't do that, but on the record, I support that. But yeah, I think it is something we've discussed this issue. I know last year I actually asked you a similar question, and I'm always happy to learn more information. So thank you for. In terms of the pilot program, do you have that? Or I saw it in the one of the local articles, but can I get a copy of that from you?
Yeah, we'll have the.
Great. Thank you very much.
But Delegate Mangione, I mean, and this is the crux of our problem, really, in the Transportation Trust Fund, funding transportation across the state, is with that decline in gas tax revenue, how do we replace it, and how do we do it in a way that is fair to the users of the system? That's really the $100 million question. Actually, it's more like a couple $1 billion question. That's why we're here. That's why we're in these desks. So I know that you will help us figure that out. Any other questions on this one? Do we have anybody here to testify? John Corn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the subcommittee. John Corn, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, but today representing a broad coalition of advocates from across the state of Maryland. And we're also a participant in the Move Maryland coalition that supports the governor's transportation budget. I want to first say that the level of collaboration between the advocates and MDOT, and especially at TSO, is at an all-time high. I've been at this for 12 years or so, and it's absolutely great. A shared commitment to the goals of a safe, reliable, accessible, cost-effective, multimodal transportation system. So thank you for that. The MDOT has embraced these goals. It shows up in Vision Zero. It shows up in Complete Streets, which recently sort of doubled down and made sure all modal agencies embrace that. We want to make sure that budgets align with these goals. We know that we can't pave our way out of congestion. We've got to do some mode shift. We can't do that unless we make it safe. for people that travel on foot or on bike, need access to transit, either by choice or for people who have no other economic choice. We must make it safe. Thank you, Delegate Edelson, for bringing up the Kim Lamphere Bikeways program. Kim was my mentor, probably 15 years my junior, but my mentor here at the legislature. I try to channel her when I'm here as best I can. I will add to what you said that the Bikeways program brings tens of millions of dollars into the state. We have a project that will connect the trails in Prince George's and Anne Arundel County, soon to open. $500,000 Bikeways program positioned us for a $5 million federal TAP grant. So it's really important to fund that. So thank you.
Thank you for being here. As a husband who rides 100 miles a week, I have a great appreciation for what you do. And we're trying to do the best we can. We'll continue to try to do the best we can on the bikeways. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we are finished with the Secretary's office. We're going to start on Maryland State Highway Administration with Mr. McCullough. You may proceed, and the Secretary is being joined by the Administrator Pines for SHA. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The operating budget in 2026 for State Highway Administration increases by $25.5 million or 7.1%. But as discussed in the last one, that does not include the 2025 budget amendment that brought in $5 million. So adjusting for that, the increase would be just over $20 million or 5.7%. The Managing for Results discussion begins on page 4. The first Exhibit 1 on page 4 looks at traffic fatalities and fatality rates. So the annual traffic fatalities are the bars, the maximum fatality rate goal is the black line, and then the fatalities per 100 million miles traveled is the red line. And you can see that fatalities in 2023 and the fatality rate were both up from the prior year, and kind of shows a disturbing trend that is for the last couple of years of increasing fatalities on our roadways. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows the annual person hours of delay. Those are the bars, and the percentage of unreliable travel time, which is the line read across against the right axis. As you can see, the congestion that really fell during COVID has steadily increased and is currently above the goal for maximum person hours of delay, and the percentage of unreliable travel time has been increasing, but is projected to be kind of flat between 23 and 24. Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows system preservation and maintenance issue of the bridge with components rated poor or worse. You can see from that graphic that goes from 2015 through 2024 actual that Maryland does a very good job of maintaining its bridges. You can see that there's less than 1% of Maryland bridges have a rating in any of the components of poor or worse. And just note that even with a bridge that has a rating of poor, that does not mean it's unsafe. MDOT and SHA would close a bridge that was unsafe and not allow it to be used. Exhibit 4 on page 7 shows another system preservation managing for result indicator, which is highway maintenance condition. And that graph on page 7 shows the percentage of the highway network and the overall preferred maintenance condition. The line shows the goal, which is 85% of all the highway network should be in that condition. And it shows that SHA met this goal 6 out of the past 10 years. On page 8, Exhibit 5 shows the overview of agency spending. SHA utilizes its own personnel and contractual services to provide the road maintenance and its other activities. And Exhibit 5 shows that just under 50% is provided with SHA's own personnel. Contractual services makes up 34% of its annual operating budget spending. Exhibit 6, starting on page 9 and going to page 10, is the proposed budget change. As I indicated at the beginning, $25.5 million. $5.9 million of that is in the personnel expenses. Operations restored funding from fiscal 2025 cost containment adds 8.2. And also kind of new this year in terms of a sizable increase is a line for the rehabilitation of SHA's dump truck fleet, which they are doing in lieu of purchases. And this is caused both by supply chain issues, cost increases that makes it harder to get the trucks on a schedule that they can do. So they're being forced to maintain what they currently have. The winter maintenance and snow removal budget for many years, the department has been budgeting at the 5-year average annual expenditures. That is true for both the fiscal 2025 and 26 budgets. In 2026, the allowance is $64.2 million, which equals that 5-year average ending with fiscal 2024. As of February 3rd of 2025, SHA, though, had expended $62.3 million of its $69.8 million fiscal 2025 removal snow maintenance budget, and that was prior to some of the more recent storms we've had. So I would expect that they will exceed the budgeted amount of that account. Operating and PAYGO personnel data is shown at the top of page 11. SHA gets 8 operating positions in the operating budget. As with other modes, DLS is recommending that those be denied as new positions. However, recommend that vacant positions be reclassified as needed to meet that demand. The PAYGO description begins on page 11, the bottom, with the first discussion, the state aid that's provided in the form of highway user grants. Exhibit 7 on page 12 shows the fiscal 2026 allowance of $445.8 million is a $52.6 million increase from the current year working. That's largely explained by the fact that the local share of the account that determines this aid amount increases from 18% in fiscal 2025 to 20% for 2026 and 2027. The county allocation for the counties and municipality amounts of that 445 is shown on Exhibit 8 on page 13. And then turning to page 14, the IIJA exhibits shows that SHA has been awarded 9 discretionary grants, which total $62.2 million under IIJA. We do note that at the beginning of this month, the Federal Highway Administration did issue a memo to state transportation directors suspending approval of the state vehicle infrastructure deployment plans under which the state's charging infrastructure network is being built out. And we've asked SHA to brief you on the impacts of that memo has on that program and any other programs it's already been received awards for. The 6-year program for SHA is shown in Exhibit 10 on page 16 by investment category. The 6-year program totals $6.8 billion. This is a $564 million decrease from the prior year 6-year program. The fiscal 2026 allowance is shown on Exhibit 11. This totals $1.1 billion and shows the pie chart shows that 84% of that is in the minor program, with major projects making up an additional 14%. The breakout of the minor program by investment category is shown in the pie chart on page 18, Exhibit 12. You can see that system preservation makes up the largest category, followed by safety and security, and then the local funding. The minor program funding by project type is shown in Exhibit 13 on page 19, and you can see under the safety and congestion, all of the rehabilitation categories that make up that system preservation amount. The cash flow for SHA is shown in Exhibit 14 on page 20. The 2025 as introduced to 2025 working shows $124.2 $6.2 million decrease. And then there's a further decrease between 2025 and 2026 of $16.3 million. The Exhibit 15, which goes from pages 21 to 30, shows kind of the select major projects. And in order to get onto this exhibit, the project had to receive either $1 million or more in the budget year, fiscal 2026, or $5 million or more over the 6-year program. And so those are shown by county with state projects at the very end, and you can peruse that at your leisure. The first year funding chart on page 30, Exhibit 16, shows that 99.8% of SHA's capital program in 2026 is ongoing funding, with $2 million or less than 1% representing new first-year funding. Those first-year projects are shown on page 31. The significant changes from the prior Consolidated Transportation Program are shown on Exhibit 18 on page 32. There were 3 projects added to the construction program and 2 moved from the D&E program to the construction. Recommended actions are on page 33. As I indicated prior, the 8 positions that are being requested for operating new positions are recommended for deletion of funding, and the agency should seek to reclassify existing vacant positions instead. For PAYGO, the recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my presentation.
Mr. Secretary, would you like to proceed or have your director?
Just very quickly.
Okay.
Again, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation. Thank you, Stephen, for the analysis. I just want to take a moment to thank this committee and obviously the entire legislature for what they did last year by passing the Maryland Road Workers Protection Act. As you may recall, we're coming up on a very grim anniversary, March 22nd, of where we lost 6 of our co-workers on the Beltway. We worked very closely with Lieutenant Governor to help form that bill, and obviously with your support, I think it's going to go a long way in making our workers and the people that we hire safer. I just want to thank the committee for that. With that, I'll turn it over to Administrator Pines.
Well, thank you, Secretary Wiedefeld, and good afternoon, Chair Watson and members of the committee. I also want to thank Steve for his continued professionalism and the work that he does service to DLS. Thank you. I'm pleased to tell you today about the big things that SHA is doing across Maryland, focused on our key goals of ensuring safety for our customers and employees, delivering a multimodal transportation system, and promoting job creation and economic growth. As the Secretary noted, SHA's $6.8 billion Consolidated Transportation Program for fiscal years 25 through 30 includes additional funding advanced by Governor Moore. Make no mistake, this investment is critical to address long-standing SHA needs. These funds will address critical projects to make our roadways safer, create jobs, and boost Maryland's economy. Additionally, it will help us unlock more federal dollars, and we're working with our federal partners to apply these funds to projects in the CTP. I'd like to share with you some of the major projects that will benefit with this additional funding, all of which would otherwise be on hold due to fiscal constraints. These include US 15 in Frederick County. We're investing more than $162 million to build additional lanes and other features to improve capacity, traffic flow, and safety. This is a critical project for regional mobility and economic development. Also, I-81 in Washington County will fund construction for a 4-mile, $99 million widening to improve safety and ease congestion. I-81 is part of the National Highway Freight Network, and this project will improve commercial vehicle capacity and boost Maryland's economy. Additionally, planning and design for the Maryland 97 in Montgomery Hills in Montgomery County is shown in the CTP, and we're actively working with our federal partners for the funding for the remainder of the project. Governor Moore's support also provides funding for other projects such as planning and design for Medical Center Drive at the Capitol Beltway in Prince George's County, and planning and design for the I-795 interchange at Dolefield Boulevard in Baltimore County. These restorations are in addition to other big things that are already in the CTP, including things like the continued construction for the $268 million interchange at Maryland 4 and Suitland Parkway, and the ongoing work on the Baltimore Beltway to turn the median shoulder into a travel lane for peak hour use to help reduce congestion. We're also continuing department-wide investments in safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and others we consider vulnerable road users in our roadway network. And under the Secretary's leadership, MDOT has adopted the Complete Streets policy, which you heard about earlier, outlining our commitment to make our network accessible for every Marylander. SHA has put that policy into action with the launch of our Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, or what we call PSAP. The plan is published on our context-driven website, along with specific project details for corridors across the state. PSAP projects are focused on data-driven, safety-focused improvements that have minimal impacts to right-of-ways and utilities and are limited in scope so that they can be accomplished quickly and cost-effectively. I'm proud to say that since we've discussed this concept last year, we've launched the PSAP projects in 13 separate corridors. These corridors experienced 425 crashes with vulnerable road users over the last 4-year period, including 67 serious injury and 31 fatal crashes. And all of these corridors have crash rates significantly higher than the statewide averages. For example, Maryland 650, 201, and 150 experience crash rates of 8 to 9 times higher more with vulnerable road user fatalities per mile than the statewide average. These are critically dangerous roadways. We know that more is needed for similar PSAP and vulnerable road user corridors, and so the proposed budget also includes $27.5 million additional funds for Complete Streets. These additional funds will allow SHA to implement critical safety improvements like the addition of PSAP corridors and US 1 at Dr. Patel and Rowanberry in Howard County. Beyond our investments in fiscal infrastructure improvements, SHA is also addressing one of the 4 E's of safety by supporting enforcement measures like this session's Senate Bill 520 and House Bill 348 for speed monitoring systems in safety corridors. This bill recognizes the disproportionate dangers on certain safety corridors in SHA's vulnerable road user safety assessment. These safety corridors make up only 3% of SHA's total roadway miles, but experience 20% of all vulnerable road user fatalities. We must shift our fast and furious roadways away from a need for speed mindset to one that uses all available options to get everyone home safely every day. Senate Bill 520 and House Bill 348 will help us towards that Vision Zero goal. We're also innovating through our quick build projects and enhancing safety with numerous spot improvements. For example, last year we upgraded 1,009 crosswalks at 462 intersections across the state, and we're continuing with this initiative this year in 2025. These efforts are all part of our aggressive approach to make our roadways safer for all users and to move Maryland closer to the goal of Vision Zero. Zero fatalities on our roadways, including protecting our workers and employees, as the Secretary referred to earlier. Having infrastructure in good working order is critical to that mission, and we're focused on system preservation and maintaining our assets in a state of good repair. In fiscal year 2026, we have $859.8 million budgeted in our capital program for system preservation and minor projects. This will address state of good repair needs in pavement, bridges, and other critical assets. We must have a unified message on safety to succeed in another key aspect of our mission, which is to recruit and cultivate the next generation of engineers and transportation professionals. We focused on this team, and over the past 2 years, we've cut our vacancy rate in half. In February of 2023, our vacancy rate was 12.1%. We've maintained an average of 6.1% over the past year, dipping down to 5.6% in November of 2024. As indicated in the DLS report, we had a brief spike at the end of the year with end of the year retirements, which is normal, but we're back down today to 6% vacancy rate, aligned with our turnover. Beyond recruitments of new hires, we're also focused on retention and team excellence, building leaders among the SHA team. We have several SHA team members in the Leadership Maryland Emerging Leaders Program. And last year, we graduated dozens of employees in our own 12-week Leadership Education and Development Program, or what we refer to as LEAD. On the operating side, the FY26 budget also includes an additional $4 million for mowing and litter cleanup. We know litter cleanup is important to many communities from the standpoint of aesthetics, economic vitality, and safety. And our leadership action on litter has also included updating and re-energizing our Adopt the Highway program, which has now made easier for community groups and individuals to join us. We welcome everyone to show their civic pride in fighting against litter, so please visit our updated website and join an Adopt the Highway team. Now, turning specifically to the DLS recommendations, SHA respectfully requests the retention of the 8 positions in the proposed budget to support critical asset management and program management functions. As indicated in our written response, we are actively working and constantly addressing attrition and vacancies as of today at our turnover rate. And our existing positions have declined over the years, and we need our positions to perform critical state functions. Those position declines are shown in the presentation that we provided. The 8 budgeted positions will help us leverage more federal dollars and deliver faster projects for critical programs. Related to the second DLS item, we provided a detailed written breakdown on the status of the federal electric vehicle programs, and I'm happy to get into any more questions that you may have on that. With that, I'll turn things back over to Secretary Wiedefeld, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Good. Take any questions you have.
Thank you. I'll just bring up one quick thing before I move on to our vice chair for questions, and that is the money that you have budgeted for winter weather. And I think that we had, if I'm thinking right, 69 million budgeted.
That's correct.
And I assume we're going to go over that by a decent amount. Yeah. And where do you think we're going to end up, and how are you going to make up that difference? And do you need any help, which we can't give you?
Well, I'm going to need to get it from somewhere, so we'll leave that part alone. But sure. So right now, based on our expenses through the most recent storm, as of the tracking of a few days ago, we were at $85 million expended. And so we are projecting, based on history, we still continue to get weather events out in Western Maryland. So we will be north of that in the year-end close for sure.
So maybe close to 100 million?
Yes.
Okay, which leaves us somewhere between $30 and $40 million hole in the budget.
Correct.
Okay. Vice Chair Edelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you initially called me the Vice Chair for Questions, which is a great title that I'd love to keep. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Administrator. I do just want to say, I know I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating how struck I was when you had us over to your facility about a year or so ago, and the fact that you were on a first-name basis with pretty much every member of the team at the facility that we ran into, how amazing that was to see how you interact with your personnel. I think that's so important.
Thank you.
I know this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but when looking at the managing for results of the budget, it's probably fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, that in terms of system preservation and maintenance and bridge safety, you're doing an excellent job. In terms of easing congestion and lowering fatalities and accidents on our roadways, we probably need to try to improve a little bit in those categories. I mean, for example, in calendar year 23, total vehicle miles traveled increased by 700 million over the prior year, and traffic-related fatalities increased by 55. I think it'd be hard for us to ignore the correlation between those two. And in addition, if we look at the congestion numbers, the DC, Baltimore metropolitan regions have some of the worst congestions in the country. That dipped significantly during the height of COVID, but those numbers are jumping up again, and they're above the goals that we've set for ourselves. Obviously, you have excellent ways of addressing these. The investments we've made in the Complete Streets program and the PSAP program that you mentioned. We have the first 5 major corridors in the PSAP program, which is great. That's very exciting. There's about $120 million total in the budget for that program. I was hoping you could sort of give us the connection between those two in terms of how these investments in the PSAP program will help us to reduce congestion, accidents, roadway fatalities, because obviously there's also a cost for Marylanders in those. As we sit in congestion, as we unfortunately get in accidents, there's a physical cost to Marylanders in dealing with that we're all doing our best to bring down. So I was hoping you could sort of create the connection between those two for us.
Sure. No, great question. Thank you. So on the congestion front, we do have a number of projects. I'll get to PSAP in one second, but I do want to talk about some of the things that are in this budget proposal statewide that will help with that. So a feature project, US 15 and I-81, those 2 projects that I talked about, a significant component of those projects is to reduce congestion in those major corridors through fairs, through important regions, Hagerstown, Frederick being one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing county. Congestion is growing there, and so this type of project will help to relieve that. Additionally, we are implementing a number of other improvements around the state, things called TISMO projects and also smart signal projects that will help to alleviate congestion using technology. So I talked about that 695 shoulder running project that will allow for peak hour relief where the shoulder will become travel lane. That's using ITS infrastructure to open up that during peak periods. Similarly, we have advanced adaptive traffic signals that can actually have cameras, look at the different directions and see when there's pedestrians, when there's vehicles, and help to alleviate congestion by having that real-time adaptive monitoring. We also make, on the operating side, significant investments in our CHART program to help make sure that when incidents occur, we clear them out of the roadway as fast as possible. This is a great program. You had the opportunity to visit our statewide operations center, but we're continuing to make those investments, and that's supported in this budget. Back to your question on PSAP, we hear it a lot that highways in Maryland were constructed to get people from point A to B. Right? And oftentimes they were built through communities where some of the design was an afterthought. Today, the PSAP program will largely help to rectify some of that, where we are going to balance the needs of our motorists and the communities that drive through. So when we look at corridors with PSAP, sometimes the design solution is to slow people down. Speed kills, unfortunately. The stats show that somebody driving at 40 miles an hour, if a vehicle is driving at 40 miles an hour and hits a pedestrian, there's an 85% chance of fatality. Drop that down to 20 miles an hour, it is the complete opposite likelihood where somebody will survive. So it's really key to get speed down to help people not have fatal injuries during these types of crashes. That does mean that the PSAP corridors will at times use traffic calming and other devices, that things like pedestrian hybrid beacons to create additional crossings for pedestrians. But certainly crashes cause closures, cause delays from incident management, from fatality reconstruction events. All of these things disturb motorists significantly, and so if we can get the fatalities down, that will help to improve incident reduction around the state. We are also, as we're developing PSAP corridors, making sure that we look at our signals, look at the infrastructure, and make sure that it's designed to help balance the needs of both the best we can. But we do need, on PSAP, we do need to reduce speeds.
Got it. Thank you. I suppose since we're short on time, we can have the debate another time as to whether highway expansion actually eases congestion. But on the PSAP piece, how do you determine which projects go first? Do those get submitted to you from local jurisdictions? Is there another round of applications that will be coming in? How does that work?
So there's 2 parts to this. Our first effort was to develop the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. That's published on our website and has 23 corridors in it that define the specific locations. Fatalities and serious injuries are the primary drivers on how those are identified. Beyond that, we are also, as part of our strategic highway safety plan, required by the feds within the federal code to do a vulnerable road user safety assessment. So we have updated that assessment that includes 6 years of data from fatalities and crashes. That has 89 corridors in it total around the state that, again, are based on fatalities and serious injuries.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for your work on that. Really appreciate it.
Delegate Solomon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would just echo the comments of the Vice Chair. But I just wanted to start, Mr. Pines, just by thanking you. Your team, particularly in our area where we've got, our entire district is crisscrossed by state highways, some which have some less than wonderful safety records with crashes. Your team's just been really great in responding to issues. And I want to take every opportunity I can to thank you, because we've seen improvements in things that, frankly, under previous folks would have taken years. Some new traffic lights, we have other stuff in the works, and obviously you and your team have been amazing to work with on the Montgomery Hills 97 project. I was hoping maybe you'd wear your shirt today. For those who weren't at our CTP roadshow, we presented a really wonderful shirt from a community festival that they have every year to rally the community around the project, and it's been one of the few road projects that I can think of where the entire community has been on board with it. And so just really grateful to see that back in the CTP, the shift, obviously, in November at the Transportation Planning Board with the federal money. We got a really lovely shout out in one of the community newsletters that they sent around. So I know how much people really appreciate actually seeing things happen there. So just wanted to say thank you on that. And again, your District 3 team in particular is just so responsive on all the things that we're trying to do. But obviously, to the Vice Chair's point, particularly in the pedestrian safety piece, we know we need to do more. And so glad to see the money in the budget. We'll just obviously make a plea that more is always needed. The one question that I did have for you, just sort of generally, is obviously there's still a good chunk of money in the budget around the 495, 270 expansion piece. And I'm sure this is a big shock that I'm going to ask you this, but just wanted to know, what is the plan? Where are we with things? Obviously we now have a new administration in place, but while they may view road expansion differently, they may view discretionary grants differently than the previous administration. So where are we with the planning on things, and what's the next year look like for those projects?
Can we take it? So you will see that the majority of the funding that's in the CTP has been shifted into 28, 29, and 30. We are still actively pursuing the Bridge Investment Program grant, working with the new administration to see how to make that an attractive grant. Over the next year, though, we're really going to be primarily focused on knowing that we've had these funding challenges and have not been successful on receiving a grant to date. The bridge condition is a driver here for us to make sure that we keep it in a good state of good repair. And so over the next year, we're going to complete a life cycle analysis to really understand. We've been talking about, we estimate that the remaining service life of the bridge is within the next 10 years. We really want to do a deeper dive into that and pin down that number, what strategic investments we could make to potentially extend that number if we needed to, because funding wasn't available to do the larger projects. So we're still moving actively, working with our partners in Virginia and having discussions with Montgomery County. You will see also in the CTP there's funding for the transit commitments pieces. We actively have support in our District 3 office to help with portions of the reviews for the BRT program for Montgomery County as part of the transit commitment. So we're still working, but we do recognize that funding has been difficult for this program. And so we really need to get our heads around the life cycle implications for the bridge.
Okay. Do you have any update on, now that we're seeing a more return to some level of normal traffic? I know we made all of these congestion-related improvements on 270, which I will say anecdotally, when I am on that road in rush hour, it does seem to be moving considerably better than it did before. But do you have, now that we have a little bit more time since sort of the return to normal, what kind of an impact those, the lane reconfigurations and some of the other ramp metering things that you all put in place have done?
So the ramp metering project, when the project was designed, there were estimates that were projected. It's sad to say this, but one of the benefits of the Key Bridge collapse is that we developed some regional models for that we are now applying to the DC region. That's something with the new administration's policy with the no remote work. We've kind of realized that we need to keep a pulse on what's happening on the Capital Beltway. So our planning team is starting to apply that model, a similar model to what we developed for the Baltimore region around the Key Bridge, to the DC region so that we can monitor that. I don't have the results yet as that's still being developed, but we'll be happy to give you updates when we have it.
Okay, and then last question. Thank you again, Madam Chair. I didn't realize that you were doing a shoulder pilot program on the Baltimore Beltway. Is there any discussion or conversation? I know that's something that we've talked about in broader strokes, and again, that 495 runs through the heart of my community, and frankly, is often a scourge of my drive down here. But is there the thought of doing something similar like that during high peak areas where opening up an additional lane on either side might make a huge difference?
This would make more sense if I had a picture of the American Legion Bridge in front of you, and I encourage you Google that and take a look. Yeah. The constraints of the width there's just not enough room to be able to practically fit it in.
I was going to say, I'm not even talking about the bridge. I'm just talking about the rest of the road.
Oh, even beyond. I'm sorry. I thought you were really talking about American Legion Bridge. We have been engaging, particularly with Prince George's County. They've been asking us to look at congestion around the Capital Beltway, particularly at key interchanges through their corridor. We haven't done that study at this time, but it is something that we've been floating around.
Do we need Montgomery County to make a formal request for that? Can I make that formal request? Again, I think innovative ways that don't require a huge amount of money or a huge amount of construction to ease congestion, particularly in that corridor, would be, we can follow up more on that, but I think that is an idea that we had floated, again, years ago, but would be great to sort of understand if the same principle that's applicable in the Baltimore Beltway would be applicable in parts of Montgomery County on 495.
Sure, happy to follow up and chat more about that.
And then would also just love to dig in more offline on I know we're running short on time on the NEVI and the fear of the freeze from the feds as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I think we will save a minute or two at the end of the hearing for that, and we'll go to Delegate Spiegel now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually forgot to turn my button off, but Delegate Solomon already asked my question, which, as a representative of the I-270 corridor, was also about the American Legion Bridge project, and I echo the frustration and the hope that you all and he have already expressed. So thank you.
All right, Delegate Solomon, you're on. Your additional question?
I'm just curious, we can talk more sort of about where things are, but in terms of going forward, how much of what's in the NEVI plan is now potentially on hold because of the concerns and the freeze from DOT? Or did we already pull down that 60 million that's in there? Or are we waiting? Is that allocated on the sort of the life cycle of the full surface transportation bill?
So the written response talks about how we had broken it up in the implementation plan. We did fully advertise and obligate the NEVI Round 1 contract, which applies at 22 separate corridors, 126 direct current fast charging stations. We do expect that because that's fully obligated for construction, that program will be able to move forward. So we fortunately got one through. We had the NEVI Round 2 contract advertised, but unfortunately had not received proposals and processed it to obligation prior to the new rules coming out. So right now we did delay the proposal submission date on that contract until June to allow us more time to assess when the new guidance comes from USDOT on how they're going to treat the program, to see if there will be an opportunity to adapt that contract to meet whatever requirements are in the new guidance. Obviously, we have very little, we would be speculating if we tried to guess what that would say at this point. So we are in a little bit of a waiting game, but the contract's fully prepared and ready to move forward. We do also have some grants for mid to heavy duty vehicles that are on hold right now as a consequence of them lacking that full obligation. Federal obligation is really the trigger. Once you're over that line, they were allowing you to move forward, but those obligations for NEVI are on hold at this point.
So of I think it was like 63 million that we were supposed to get through that, we've given out 12. It says here you thought we were going to potentially give out another 30 million. So of the 63 total, we're basically on hold of about 51, give or take?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe we should just tell them we'll give it all to Tesla. I know we gave them like 2 million in contracts in the first round, so if we give the rest of it to it, maybe they'll let it go. Sorry for the editorializing on that one, but thank you.
Other member questions? I do want to mention, Mr. Secretary, you talked about the Maryland Roadways Protection Act at the beginning, and it really, I do think, will and is making a difference. Someone close to me recently got a ticket for driving on the Beltway, and this person said, well, I was only going 60 miles an hour. And I said, well, was it in a work zone? Yes, and the work zone speed limit was 45 miles an hour. It was an $80 ticket. And my point is, that will not happen again with this person. So it really does, once that happens to you, you really do start to look at and see the orange cones differently and understand that it's time to slow down. Right now, we have a lot of construction on Route 100, a lot of work zones on Route 100, and I do see people actively slowing down. So I think, that was a good bill, a terrible tragedy that prompted it, but I feel like it's definitely making a difference and making it safer for our workers.
Definitely.
Do we have any other questions? Do you all expect any written questions for this agency? Okay, so we want to thank you, but we do have people that are testifying after you, and we appreciate them for being here. We're starting with John Corinne, followed by Michelle Gordon and Victoria Venable. We will say that Mr. Corin mentioned how closely everyone is working together on the transportation. We do appreciate that here as the House of Delegates and the Senate. And we know the governors and the governor's staff is really helping to coordinate that and make that happen. So we really appreciate all of the advocacy this year for the transportation budget. And you may begin, Mr. Corin.
Thank you. Again, John Corin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, but again, speaking for a broad coalition of folks from across the state. As I said earlier, we participate in the Move Maryland Coalition and support the governor's budget. I want to thank SHA just the way I thank Secretary Wiedefield for the shared commitment we have to safety, especially vulnerable road user safety. Last year, over 570 people were killed on Maryland roadways. Over 40% were vulnerable road users, people lawfully traveling outside of a vehicle. And we appreciate the focus on safety. Oftentimes we have trade-offs of capacity versus safety, and we're very pleased with the commitment to make safety first. So I'll leave it there. I thank the committee for its commitment to this focus on safety as well. And I guess the last thing I'll say is a person's decision to walk or bike someplace rather than drive is only as good as the worst segment that they have to traverse. And that means creating a network. And so the collaboration between the state, counties, and municipalities, absolutely vital to building these networks, and I see SHA doing that. So thank you.
Michelle Gordon. Good morning, Madam Chair, respected committee members. I am Michelle Gordon, County Administrator for the Washington County Board of County Commissioners. I-81 has been the county's top transportation project for over 25 years. And just to give you some background, in 1998, a Quad State Task Force reviewing I-81 was formed, and that task force included public and private officials from Maryland, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. This multi-state task force concluded that widening I-81 from Harrisonburg, Virginia to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania was essential for the safety of citizens, and that I-81 is the single most important economic development asset in the region. Since that report, the widening of I-81 from 4 lanes to 6 lanes has been listed as the county's top priority. Other states along I-81 have made significant progress toward achieving the goals established by this Quad State Task Force. West Virginia has completed or is in the process of adding a 3rd lane to over 18 miles of their 26-mile stretch of I-81 and has invested over $200 million on those projects. The Virginia General Assembly passed legislation in 2019 to secure dedicated funding for their 325-mile corridor as part of a $2 billion plan to improve I-81 over 13 years. Pennsylvania has developed 12 focus areas for improvement, and of those, 4 top projects are in Greencastle and Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which are in the first county across the Maryland state line. New York has also joined those efforts, and beginning in 2022, they have pledged over $800 million to improve I-81. I-81 is only 12.5 miles long in Maryland, with all of that being in Washington County. So far, Maryland has completed the widening of the first mile of our 12.5-mile stretch, and 3 more phases are needed to complete this entire project. That first mile was a huge undertaking and included the widening of Potomac River Bridge in Williamsport, Maryland at the West Virginia state line. Funding for the continuation of Phase 2 is currently included in the fiscal year 26 capital plan for SHA. This funding is critical for the economic corridor. On behalf of the Board of County, was that the buzzer? Okay. We encourage you to support the funding proposed in for I-81 and SHA's fiscal year 26 budget. Thank you very much.
We appreciate your testimony, and you should know, and you do know, that we fought really hard to get I-81 moving last year and this year, and we appreciate the working with the Department of Transportation on that. So we'll continue to work on that. Victoria Venable, Cheryl Court, and I'm sorry, sir, are you here to testify?
Yes.
Commission President Barr, was he on the list?
Yes. What's the name?
John Barr.
Go
Ben
ahead,
Groff.
sir. Just identify yourself for the record.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you. Excuse me. My name's John Barr, President of the County Commissioners of Washington County, and I'll be very brief. On behalf of the Board of County Commissioners and our entire community and county, I want to express our gratitude for the funding and the support that the state provides through the CTP. These projects not only improve transportation, but they also create jobs, stimulate economic growth, and promote sustainability for our community. We encourage you to support the funding proposed in SHA's budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Victoria?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Victoria Venable. Thank you, Chair Watson and Vice Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. I am the Government Relations Director for Frederick County Government, and I'm here today on behalf of not only the County Executive, but also our full County Council. You have in front of you in your packet a letter from our Council and the County Executive. As you heard from Administrator Pines, the FY26 budget includes planning, engineering, and design for the US 15 Safety Improvement Project, as well as projected in the Consolidated Transportation Program, the full construction of the project. This funding, of course, is dependent on decisions that this body needs to make about revenue, and I'm here today to convey the support you have from Frederick County government for those hard decisions. In that letter, you will see there are multiple examples of the safety concerns of this particular project. It's about a 2-mile project, and we have plenty of data on the local level as well as with the state level of the safety concerns in that region. You'll note that it's about to be the 2-year anniversary of a deadly crash in that region from a tanker exploding because of significant dangerous weaving conditions as well as the congestion in that region. In addition to the safety implications of this project contributes significantly to quality of life concerns we have here in Frederick, not only the sound barriers and the safety and congestion relief, but also the fact that it will actually provide a barrier between the main highway and some of the residential areas adjacent to this corridor. Finally, I do want to express how important this project is as an interstate commerce corridor in Frederick County. Any way that you want to get out of the city, you are going to have to touch US 15. And then, of course, if you are going out of the county and into other commerce areas, you are going to need to use that as a major corridor. So I want to convey our full support for the difficult decisions you have to make in front of you. This is on behalf, of course, of the county executive, Jessica Fitzwater, and county council.
Thank you. And tell the county executive we're working as hard as we can to make sure that your funding is safe. And
Thank you.
we now have, thank you for being here. We now
Absolutely.
have Cheryl Court, Jed Weeks, and Michael Sakata. And I failed to say, but I think all of you are sticking to it anyway, that there's a 2-minute time limit, and you'll hear a very gentle reminder up here on the right somewhere if you go over the limit. And Cheryl, would you like to begin?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm here for Cheryl. My name is Carrie Kosicki. I'm the Montgomery County Advocacy Manager, for the Coalition for Smarter Growth. Thank you, Chair Watson and members of the subcommittee for having me. So we recognize that Maryland is facing some pretty daunting budgetary challenges right now, which makes this a perfect time to take a hard look at how our transportation investments are serving our residents, and to focus on patterns of growth and development that are not only more efficient, but more environmentally and fiscally sustainable. And we really want to commend SHA for their work in this area. They are making investments to ensure that we're maintaining our roadways, our sidewalks, our bike lanes, and our trails, so that we can use the limited funds that we do have to enhance the safety, accessibility, and equity of our state highway network. And a couple areas that we just want to call out here. First of all, the Complete Street Program and the Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. That's already been mentioned by many speakers, but they're doing fantastic work there, literally saving lives. And we're very grateful for that. In particular, though, we also would like to see some more work on pedestrian improvements around the Purple Line. That's a major transit investment that's going to connect a ton of people across the region to economic opportunity and more. But it's not going to be as useful if people aren't able to get there safely walking and biking. And then something else that I haven't really heard mentioned yet, but I really want to thank SHA for their work in this area, is on dedicated bus lanes and their collaboration with local governments, particularly in Montgomery and Prince George's County, where CSG works. This is a low-cost but very high-impact way to get more out of our existing investments and improve bus service for riders. So I'd also like to mention that there are several bills before the General Assembly this session that can help further SHA's investments, make them more efficient, and make sure we're using taxpayer funds well. That's the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act, MDOT's Transportation Investment Priorities Act, and the TOD bill. So finally, when we invest in safe and sustainable modes of transportation, it's a virtuous cycle. People are better able to realize the benefits of our existing investments. They get more reliable service. We have fewer injuries and deaths. And so we ask you to give SHA the resources that it needs to continue its good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Jed Weeks?
Good afternoon, Chair Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, members of the subcommittee. My name is Jed Weeks. I'm the Executive Director of Bike More, Baltimore City's Livable Streets Advocacy Organization. We represent 8,000 engaged constituents and the over 110,000 Baltimoreans that lack access to a car and rely on walking, biking, and public transit to get to jobs and all of their other needs in life. We're also a member of Governor Moore's MOVE Coalition with Coalition for Smarter Growth, John Corrin back there, and Bemi here from No Boundaries Coalition in Baltimore. So why am I here today supporting the SHA as an advocate generally opposed to road widening in a city where SHA doesn't even control the roads? It's because a huge number of our regional jobs, accessible via transit, unfortunately exist outside of the Baltimore city limits. So, what good is an accessible bus stop in Sandtown if the bus rider alights a quarter mile from their job in Baltimore County and there's no sidewalk or crosswalk to even let them walk that remaining distance to their job? What good's a regional trail connection between Baltimore City and BWI or York, Pennsylvania, if you and your kids take your lives in your hands with every road crossing? So I'm here supporting SHA and the broader MDOT budget because this administration is focused on a fix-it-first approach to maintaining our existing infrastructure. Adoption of the new Complete Streets policy complements our local city ordinance and is resulting in retrofits that make our roads surrounding Baltimore City safer and more accessible for all road users when you cross that city-county line. This budget, combined with legislation that CSG mentioned, like the Transportation and Climate Alignment Act, will set a path forward that expands opportunity for Baltimoreans while maximizing our return on invested dollars. As you all know, the alternative outcomes to this budget are pretty disastrous, so we really appreciate you all fighting for us and trying to find expanded revenues and passing this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sakata?
Chairman Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, and distinguished members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Mike Sakata, for the record. I serve as the President and CEO of Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association, the leading voice of our state's transportation industry. Collectively, our 240 members of our association employ around over 100,000 men and women in the state. They literally have boots on the ground, repairing our crumbling roads, maintaining our aging transit lines, expanding our clogged highways, and building new bridges and pedestrian trails. It is on their behalf that I'm here today in strong support of State Highway Administration's proposed fiscal year 2026 budget. And I'm pleased to be joined by several of our members today that represent Maryland transportation firms of all sizes. We're also proud founding members of the Move Maryland Coalition. We believe that the $473 million requested in this budget is a vital investment in lives. Currently, 49% of our roads and highways are in poor condition. 46% of our bridges are at least 50 years old. This budget addresses an infrastructure crisis that, left unintended, would place the safety of every Marylander at risk. Furthermore, the investments provided in this budget for pedestrian safety will ensure that sidewalks, trails, signals, and crosswalks we build in future years will not be done at the heels of heartbreaking fatalities. This budget is an investment in the Maryland economy. Our small businesses cannot survive, our manufacturers cannot compete, and our data-driven economy will not flourish if we cannot connect products to market, consumers with businesses, and employees with jobs. Finally, is an investment in the quality of life that makes our state such a special place to call home. This budget, if approved, will make it far more possible for Marylanders to spend irretrievable time with friends, family, loved ones, rather than sitting on traffic-choked roads. This budget is practical, with outcome-driven, innovative, and user-based revenue sources that will prove sustainable over the course of time. It is for these reasons that I respectfully urge approval of State Highway Administration's budget and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. We have Benjamin Groff, Miguel Lambert, and Stephen Skippen, followed by James Hand. Okay, James Hand, you can come forward. Mr. Groff is not with us today. And Miguel, you may begin.
Madam Chairwoman Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, and members of the committee, my name is Miguel Lambert. I'm CEO of Bulldog Trucking in Beltsville, Maryland. I'm here in support of the transportation bill. Bulldog Trucking specializes in supplying sand, aggregate, and to a wide variety of projects via dump trucks. We value customer service in trucking and provide superior on-time delivery, quality service to a number of contractors within the state. With only one phone call, we can deliver small to large quantities of aggregates within the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. Bulldog Trucking is a certified minority business enterprise, disadvantaged business enterprise firm. We are a member of MTBMA and have long joined in calls on the sustainable growth, growing our transportation revenue sources. This includes working with the Together and Transportation Funding Coalition, as well as the MOVE Coalition. Bulldog Trucking fully supports Governor Moore's investment in our transportation system as we work together to position, grow our economy and workforce for the future. This investment is critical to ensure the success of the MBE DBE program and other small firms in Maryland. This investment is particularly important to small minority-owned companies just starting out as a subcontractor. This will help to enable future wealth creation opportunities for Marylanders of all backgrounds. I urge your support of Governor Moore's budget proposal for SHA. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Okay, good afternoon, Chair Watson, excuse my voice, Vice Chair Edelson, and members of committee. My name is Steve Skippen, and I serve as a Senior Project Manager for Skanska USA. I've also been a proud Maryland resident for 26 years. Skanska is one of the largest, most financially sound construction and development companies in the United States, serving a broad range of clients from transportation, power, industrial, government, aviation, and commercial. We are also proud members of MTBMA. Skanska maintains a long history in the state of Maryland, and we're pleased to be a strong partner delivering critical infrastructure projects across the state. This includes the recent delivery of the Nice Middleton Bridge replacement project in southern Maryland, the largest bridge project completed in Maryland to date, and was delivered ahead of schedule and under budget. Nearly 1 year ago now, Skanska partnered with Governor Westmore and federal, state, local partners to address the tragic collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Skanska was proud to provide emergency salvage and support services to the Maryland Transportation Authority, and we continue to remember and honor those construction workers that were lost on that tragic day. Today, we join you to support for Governor Moore's continued leadership in transportation by supporting his budget request for $473 million to the State Highway Administration. This funding is essential to maintaining Maryland's roads and bridges, addressing highway safety challenges, and supporting the state's economic growth. We are pleased to support this budget, and we ask for your support for SHA. Thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. James Hand.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is James Hand. I'm one of the third-generation owners of Concrete General. Yes, I said it, third generation. We've come a long way since my grandfather started the company over 50 years ago with a few men in a pickup truck. We have grown into being a leading Maryland firm working on bridges, retaining walls, and other critical infrastructure. We're proud to have expanded into multiple companies, all based and working in Maryland. We have over 300 employees and countless subcontractors and suppliers counting on us on a daily basis. We were among one of the first recipients of the Progressive Design Build contracts with the State Highway Administration. Our company has played a key role in major transportation projects all across the state, including the I-270 Innovative Construction Management Project, the Maryland 210 interchange at Keebert Hill Road, and the 695 Tismo project that you guys talked about earlier today. As a member of MTBMA, we have long supported sustainable transportation funding through efforts like Together with Transportation Funding and the MOVE Coalition. Governor Moore's transportation budget provides a much-needed investment in SHA, supporting businesses like CGI and other Maryland-based contractors to grow and thrive. This funding strengthens our economy, creates jobs, and ensures a strong transportation network for the future. I urge your support of Governor Moore's SHA budget proposal, not just for my benefit, or for my employees' benefit, or for my subcontractors' benefit, or the suppliers, but for all Marylanders who work and live in this great state. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And we will move to the next panel, which would be Mike Voynis, Sean Winkler, and Michael Johansson. I don't know why Sean Winkler is signed up, but he is not going to testify. Michael Johansson, and I think that is it. Did I miss anyone else out there? Okay, you two are wrapping it up. Give me what.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Watson, Vice Chair Edelson, and members of the committee. My name is Mike Voynis, Senior Vice President of H&TB Corporation. H&TB is a national engineering and infrastructure solutions firm. I lead our capital region, including our office in downtown Baltimore. H&TB's capital region proudly employs more than 300 dedicated professionals delivering some of our region's most critical infrastructure projects. With a legacy spanning over 100 years, H&TB provides services that address a wide spectrum of transportation challenges, including financing, legislation, planning and design, construction, community outreach, and ongoing operations. HNTB is proud to be a part of the Move Maryland Coalition, and we are an active member of the Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association. The approval of the proposed SHA budget is absolutely critical. It addresses essential state of good repair needs for all of MDOT's modes and fully matches all federal formula and discretionary grant programs, which will ignite economic growth statewide. Funding for these projects will enhance roadway safety and create thousands of high-paying jobs in the state and within the transportation industry. This budget enables companies like ours to expand our workforce by hiring even more talented Marylanders, lease additional office space, infuse more capital into the local economy, and contribute to the development of safer, more innovative infrastructure. When the transportation sector thrives, the entire community reaps the benefits. The approval of this budget is essential to support Maryland's thriving community through a sustainable infrastructure investment. We respectfully request your support of this budget to move Maryland forward. Thank you for the opportunity. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I did not pronounce your name correctly. It's Voinis.
Voinis, that's right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm Mike. Dealers, maybe I'll have a different perspective. So you've seen this chart that DLS produced. This budget represents a reduction in investment in highways as compared to transit. The other chart that the agency legislative staff produced shows that historically the investment in roads, including highway user revenues, at 22% of total CTP is the lowest in history. Transit at 53% is the largest. If you look at the investors, including this new investment, which is taxes on delivery fees and car sales, the investors spend $3.5 billion a year in excise taxes, gas taxes, titling taxes, registration fees, and other user fees, such as the $420 million. The investment, meaning fares, in transit is roughly $100 million. So as you are being asked to propose a budget that at the moment is unbalanced because it has not yet been approved for these new fees, and we would specifically ask you not to endorse the tax on trade-in cars. There's another issue that I've raised with you, Madam Chair, and it's the EV penetration and the decline in gas tax. They're showing by 2030, specifically related to EVs on the chart that the Secretary had today, about $150 million reduction in gas tax. We believe that's based on some outdated now projections on EV penetration. You heard about the removal of funding for EV charging stations. The administration in Washington has also suggested removing the $7,500 EV tax credit. We think the number of EVs will still be sold. We reached 10% this year. If we can maintain 10%, we think that estimate is a few hundred thousand cars off, which means it's upwards of $100 million. Hopefully, they'll collect more in gas tax than projected, which could alleviate some of the reason to tax additional car users. I've also heard a lot about the restoration of funds, and in the restoration of funds, which is based on this $420 million new user fees, roads received about $300 million worth of restoration, and light rail received about $800. So not here to make your job more difficult, but in my view, the transit spending is unsustainable. It's going to continue to come back to the users who are using roads, and there's an appropriate mix there, but I think the mix is certainly much more one-sided than not.
Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
Touch it. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the testimony. I guess I'll just jump in to defend my Baltimore colleagues. I guess maybe it's not a question, more of a statement. I mean, when you look at this chart over the course of the lifetime of it, I mean, there's definitely periods where highway spending is pretty substantial or even at par. I mean, again, having seen the state of the light rail and literally seeing it being held together by duct tape and spit, if that light rail system goes down, again, I don't represent Baltimore, but special place in my heart, started my career there. That region is, looking at a serious trouble. which obviously makes serious problems for road users, because if you take everybody that uses the light rail who does have a car, and again, that's not everybody, and you suddenly put them back on the road, that's a huge issue. So I just think it's a little tough to cherry pick 1 year when we haven't been investing in the light rail for 30 years.
Well, this chart covers all, and it does cover the MTA operating subsidy as well. So I'm not picking on one region. The increase in operating spending on the the WMATA operating subsidy and MTA operating from 24 to 26 went up $450 million in operating alone. That sounds a lot like the $420 million that's being proposed to raise. So the increase are really growing at a rate that was 30% increase in 2 years on operating costs.
If you could just let him finish.
I'm sorry.
It was his question.
It was more of an isn't that so? I mean, and I will just add again, if the metro system doesn't function, and that is the heart of my district, there is no other way to say it other than the DC region is screwed. If we take every person that rides on the metro and we put them on a road, and again, we are in a unique situation because the metro is not totally our issue. I don't know any road that was literally in the state of literally no longer ceasing to exist. And we can argue for decades before you or I were here as to why we got to the place where we were in. And obviously, costs have gone up, but I would also venture to say that the federal government would be in a serious state of disrepair if the metro didn't work because we couldn't get all of our federal employees to work. Isn't that so?
And Delegate, I probably wouldn't be up here if there wasn't a proposal to increase taxes on cars.
Okay, well, that last sentence caused you another comment.
That's all right.
Go ahead.
That's why I'm here.
Delegate Edelson.
I just want to jump in on the point of increasing taxes on cars. You're talking about the trade-in exemption?
Correct.
Okay. I want to make sure that we have clarity on that, which is currently, if you purchase a vehicle and then you look to trade in that vehicle, the amount that you pay on the titling tax for the new vehicle is deducted if you trade in the previous vehicle for the new vehicle.
Correct.
Is that correct? That only occurs if you do it at a dealer, correct?
Correct. A new or used car dealer. Correct.
Right. And so in a scenario in which I purchase a vehicle and I sell the vehicle to a friend of mine.
The old vehicle.
Sorry?
Sell the old vehicle?
Yeah, sorry. Purchase a vehicle and sell that vehicle to a friend of mine and take that money and purchase a new vehicle or a used vehicle from a dealer. I don't get any deduction in that
That's
scenario.
absolutely correct.
Okay. And in the scenario in which I trade in that vehicle to somebody that is not a registered dealer, I don't get any deduction on the titling tax in that scenario, correct?
Correct. So there's a tax consequence to those scenarios, but the business consequence is the auto business derives its kind of economic vitality from selling you a car, encouraging you to trade it in by giving you a fair price. So you also see the tax difference. Then we take that car, we recondition it, we put it back out on the used car lot. A new car dealer today may sell 1,000 new units and about 1,000 used units. That wasn't always the case. But those used unit sales are actually driving the business. We typically make a higher margin on them. And then if we actually can put that car back on the lot at a little bit more than what we gave you for it, the state still gets the 6% tax revenue on that vehicle. So it's not just the tax, which if you trade in a $20,000 car, this is a $1,200 increase in that tax, which we think is substantial. But it's the fact that it generates continued auto sales and continued taxes. That's why we're so opposed to that particular piece.
Right, and so that's the auto dealer that gets the benefit out of that. But in terms of the actual tax itself, we're not double taxing consumers. All we're saying is that you don't get a deduction from the trade-in of the previous vehicle under this proposal, right? Meaning, if the new car that I buy is a $50,000 car, and I trade in a $15,000 car for it, under the current system, I pay taxes on a $35,000 car, even though what I'm buying is a $50,000 car. If the proposal passes in the new scenario, I'll be paying taxes on a $50,000 car, and I bought a $50,000 car, correct?
Correct, but every state that has an excise tax allows trade-in. And it's because on that $15,000 car you bought a couple of years ago, you paid the 6% tax on it. So if you consider a leasing customer, which is the best example, a 3-year lease of a $50,000 car, in 3 years, you bring that $25,000 car back because it's the end of your lease, and instead of paying tax on $50,000 again, you pay tax on $25,000. We take that car on the lot and we sell it. It was part of the General Assembly's decision, as every other state has. Maryland made it back in 2007 when the state decided to increase the sales tax on cars from 5% to 6%. So we're just asking you not to take that away. If, for example, there was a bill in Ways and Means, you wanted to collect the same $140 million that this proposal has, we're not recommending it, you could increase the excise tax to 6.75%. That means everybody then, even if you're buying a used car from your neighbor, you go to the MVA, everybody pays a little bit. And it's like $375 as compared to $1,200 in the example that I have.
And it's a good thing that you are not in front of Ways and Means, you're in front of Appropriations.
Yes.
So the revenue.
I said the same thing to them.
The revenue proposals are being fully investigated by Ways and Means.
Correct.
We are working on cuts.
Well, we will also testify in Burford, which will be before this committee as well.
Good.
Next week.
All right. Any other questions for the good of the order?
Actually, I have one more.
Okay.
Since we're on the SHA budget, and that's what folks are here proposing we support, I'm just curious if you have any suggested cuts to this budget that you think we should take.
One that's close, and this is a little strange for the car dealer to say, the $8 million subsidy for electric vehicles. It's not enough money. It ran out last time in 6 weeks. I think it's in the MDE or MEA budget or something like that. The federal government's taken away their $7,500 credit. There was one that Delegate Solomon mentioned last week on MTA, which was the 78 police officers. Are they really needed at this time? I can come up with more, but you know, I'm not really in the cut department. I'm in the stop the tax department.
Okay, understood.
Going once. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much for being here. Committee members, one quick second up here before you leave, please.